Imagine living in a quiet rural town where the only crimes are the occasional petty break-ins. Then, the unimaginable happens. A family of 5 vanishes without a trace. A mother, a father, and 3 young children seem to disappear into thin air, leaving barely any clues behind. And when you finally discover the truth of what happened, it's more horrifying than you could have ever imagined. Now let's get into today's video. There's been something I have been a little bit insecure about. I get a little apprehensive about doing cases where I don't have a lot of photographs available of the victims or people involved. I personally love looking at photographs because they help me understand everything so much better, especially what the victims were like. However, they're not always available in every single case, and I do my very best. I wanted to let you know that for today's case, I have a very limited amount of those pictures. I have a lot more pictures of other important aspects of this case, but I do not want that to stop me from talking about a case that I'm interested in or that I really want to share. The family we're talking about belongs to a hard-working man named Ricky Bernieser, who was living in a very rural area out in Cushing, Wisconsin, just a few miles from the Minnesota border. Before I go into details about where Ricky was living when the events that I will be discussing occurred, I want to introduce you to him and tell you a little bit about his family and upbringing. Ricky Bruce Bernieser was born in Polk County, Wisconsin in 1956 to Virgil and Bernadine Bernieser. His parents owned and operated a mink ranch. If you don't know what that is, it's a ranch or a farm where they raise these cute little creatures that look a lot like weasels or ferrets, called minks. These little animals are bred for their fur, and according to furcommission.com, more than 85% of pelts used in the world's fur trade come from small family-run farms, just like the one that the Bernieser family owned. Wisconsin is the leading mink-producing state. Mink can be used for a lot of things. You probably see it on those furry little pom-poms people have on their purses, scarves, shoes, boots, and keychains. Furs can also be used to make clothing like coats and hats. Ricky wasn't the only child. He had 2 brothers, Wayne and Keith. His mother took pride in caring for her sons. She was a hard worker who not only helped out on the farm, but later worked as a housekeeper at hospitals, nursing homes, and motels throughout the 70s through the 90s in both Wisconsin and Minnesota. She also really enjoyed making rugs and quilts. Ricky's father, Virgil, loved farming, raising his minks, trapping, fishing, and hunting. These were activities he enjoyed with his boys. The family lived a simple life, valuing hard work and family. When Ricky was just a teen, he ended up meeting and marrying a woman named Alice. By the time he was just 20 years old, they welcomed a son into the world who took Ricky's middle name, Bruce. He was born on June 27, 1975. Ricky and Alice were a young couple, and unfortunately their marriage did not work out. Before Bruce was even 10 years old, the couple divorced. Alice remarried to a man named Ron Anderson who had a son only 2 years older than Bruce. It was like Bruce had a built-in big brother who he could look up to, learn from, and have a support system while going through the separation of his parents and living between 2 homes. Bruce needed a little bit of stability, which he found in Jesse Anderson, his new big brother. Ricky was also lucky enough to meet a very special woman named Ruth Ann around the same time. Ruth Ann had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, Mindy Lynn, who was only 2, and Heidi, who was 5. Now Bruce had 2 built-in little sisters as well. Let me introduce you to Ricky's new lady, Ruth Ann Berenson. She was born in Blue Earth, Minnesota on December 28, 1959, to Mary and Wilmer Luther Moranson. Ruth Ann was very close to her mom, who probably doted on her just a little more than the usual mom, due to the fact that Ruth Ann was blind in one eye. She really did have a lot of trouble focusing, which could make normal everyday activities harder for her. Nevertheless, Ruth Ann got by, and now she had Ricky to take care of her. But before they knew it, they were also taking care of someone else, because in 1986, when Ricky was 31 and Ruth Ann was only 28, they welcomed a little girl of their own into the world, Crystal Ann Bernieser. Ricky was a hard worker, just like his father. However, he had a lot less than his father did. This was not a wealthy family, but Ricky was doing the best that he knew how. He was working 3 part-time jobs to provide for his growing family. Most of his time was spent working for a turkey farmer, putting up fences. He was good at it and would provide these fencing services to other businesses as a freelancer. Ricky would also sell miscellaneous items at a local flea market on the weekends. This town was a very small rural town called Sterling Township. Another township, rocking up the townships on this channel in these stories, but it's not as small as last week's case. That one was a very small town called Maybe, Michigan. That one had a population of under 600. Today's case in Sterling has a population of about 724, but it's smaller in a way because they are more spread out. There's almost nothing out here. All I see are homes scattered far apart with a lot of foresty areas in between. And get this, Ricky and his family lived in an even more remote part of Sterling called the Barrens. It's actually a national park. It's very pretty, but as the name suggests, it's barren. It's located in pitted outwash deposits laid down by glacier-melted streams. Sterling Barrens has a lot of grass and a lot of dirt. This area also has wetlands and is known for their jack pine forests. For example, I looked at some real estate sites. This is what you're going to get if you live there. Land, debrayed, 2.5 acres, are going for $25,000. And then you can do what Ricky did. You put a mobile home on the land, so it would look something like this. Don't worry, I did find actual photos of Ricky's mobile home, and we will get to that a little later. But yes, this family of 5 was living in a pretty cramped living space, with Bruce going back and forth between his father's place and his mother Alice's place with his stepdad Ron, where his stepbrother lived. And that's Jesse. They lived about 20 minutes away in St. Croix Falls, so he got the best of both worlds. He got his boy time with his stepbrother in a more populated area, and he was big brother to his 3 sisters living the more simple rural life. When he was with Alice in St. Croix, he was in an area that I'm showing you on the map. Already you can see a lot more is going on there. They've got gyms, pizza places, breweries, and his high school. He was attending as a junior in 1991 at St. Croix Falls High School. As the other man of the house when he was at Ricky's, Bruce was independent. As a high schooler, he would get up, get to school on his own, then either come back home to do his homework until Ruth Ann or Ricky got back from working or getting the girls, or he was picked up by his mom on her days. Normal teenager responsibilities. I just set the stage for the time frame that we're looking at. It's 1991. Ricky's 35, his wife Ruth Ann is 31, Bruce is now 15, his stepbrother Jesse is 17, and the 3 girls, Heidi 10, Mindy 7, and Crystal 5. I truly hope I have done a decent job keeping all of the family members organized. Life for Ricky consisted of weekends at flea markets and work weeks gathering building materials and working at various fencing jobs around town and beyond, while Ruth Ann stayed home with the girls. The older 2 rode the bus to and from Cushing Elementary School, which was about a 30-minute drive. It is just dirt roads most of the way there. Bruce would also ride the bus to get to high school and then get rides home from Alice, Ron, or Jesse if he wasn't coming back to Sterling Township and the mobile home. Sometimes Ricky would have to work out of town for extended periods of time. When he did this, he wasn't really keen on Ruth Ann and the girls being left alone out in the middle of nowhere, so he would take them with him, and Bruce would go to Alice's. One of those jobs seemed to have come up in April. Ricky did a lot more fencing jobs during the spring and the summer, especially summer. That's when business was at the best point, so he would never pass up an offer because he really couldn't afford to. April 22nd, 1991 was a normal Monday. Mindy and Heidi went to school on the bus, attended class, then got on the bus again and came home after school. Bruce did the same at his school. However, it's what happened the next day that didn't make sense. An entire family was missing. Bruce's mom, Alice, gets a phone call from Bruce after school on Tuesday. He just got back to the mobile home and no one is there. He's 15. If Ricky plans to stay away for more than a few hours or a night at the most, he would have made arrangements to have Bruce go to Alice's. So what is going on? Was there a miscommunication, a mix-up of some kind? It happens. Bruce was left alone. Alice was not okay with Bruce being out in the middle of the woods by himself, so she tells him she's going to come pick him up and take him back to St. Croix until they know what's going on. They could figure it out. There were no cell phones back then. I'm sure Alice wasn't thrilled. Her 15-year-old left behind, no word from her ex-husband. She wondered what was going on. Alice wanted to know what Bruce had heard from his dad. What did he say last? Where was he going? What was the story? Bruce explained his dad told him he had a fencing job coming up, and he had to get building materials from a hardware store. And out there, it's a chain called Menards. It's like a Home Depot, and the closest one is actually an hour away in Minnesota. So, he would be back in a couple of hours or so, and he was taking Ruth Ann and the girls with him. Nothing out of the ordinary. Bruce saw them leave in one of Ricky's vehicles. The family had 3 cars. One they drove when it was all of them together going somewhere, or when Ricky needed to lug material around, and that was a green 1980 Oldsmobile station wagon. They also had a small red car and a Hyundai. After Ricky left in the station wagon with Ruth Ann and the girls, Bruce finished his homework and went to bed. The next morning, he got up, got ready for school, and got ready to get on the bus. He noticed that Ricky and the girls were not home. He figured at this point, he either misunderstood his dad. It can happen, you're 15. Sometimes I'm like, is it in one ear and out the other? He thinks, maybe I misheard my dad, or Ricky made a mistake with the info that he relayed to Bruce. But that day, when his dad wasn't back, he called his mom. So that's where we are in the timeline. Bruce is now at Alice's house. She is trying to call the mobile home for the rest of that afternoon and night, and doesn't get an answer. Upon getting up the next morning, which is Wednesday, April 24th, Alice immediately started to call again. She's hoping that someone would pick up the phone in the Brunicer household. She knows her ex-husband wouldn't have just abandoned their son on purpose and not at least let her know what was going on. She knew it was time to alert someone, so she called the police. By this point, the family had been missing for 2 days. Alice notified the Polk County Sheriff's Office. They were not immediately concerned. Crimes were rare in Polk County. Out of the entire state, that county had the lowest crime rate. If a crime was committed in that area, it was something really simple, like a cabin break-in, nothing more. So, the sheriff's office assumed the missing family would eventually show up and tell everyone there had just been a big misunderstanding. However, since there are minors involved, the police do begin to check reliable sources to gather information, to see if anyone close to the family had been informed of their absence, also retracing their steps, trying to find out what they did before they left. Things that could establish somewhat of a timeline just in case they truly were missing. They definitely don't want to waste any time. So when they interview Ricky's friends and family, they all said the same thing, that he was hardworking, did fencing as a freelancer. Ricky's father said it's probably true. He most likely went on a fencing job because he would leave for those jobs, and they were out of the area, and he would bring his family with him. That was one of the possibilities in this case. Ricky's dad gives police information about where his son shops, what he does on a regular basis, and also provides information about the local flea market. Investigators go and talk to the owner of said flea market. They find out Ricky usually reserves these areas, sets up his shop there, and reserved a unit for April 27th, which was just a few days away. This was important because the owner said Ricky has never been a no-show. So this is something police can look forward to as a date to mark down. And if at that point the family isn't back, then there would be even more cause to be concerned. So that's definitely a lead in the case. At this point, it's not as though Ricky had a ton of friends. He was well known in the area because there weren't a lot of people in the area. But there weren't that many people for police to interview. However, they were able to get in touch with a man named Jim Ewing. He was the owner of Cushing Corner Store, a gas station. And guess what he said? He said he saw Ricky. He said Ricky came by for gasoline for one of his cars. The police were like, okay, well, which day was it? And he's like, I think it was April 21st. But then he goes, wait, no, it could have been the 23rd. So now there's a bit of a discrepancy. It would make sense to police if it was April 21st. That would mean it was Sunday before the day he set out to get the building supplies and materials from Menards. He also said it could have been that Monday, the 22nd, which was the day they actually left. So both of those kind of make sense. But then he adds the 23rd, so that's the day after they left. This man is a little bit confused. There's no technology for him to go back and look at what day it was. His exact quote to police was, "I feel like in my memory, Rick was here on Tuesday, April 23rd. But there's still doubt in the back of my mind." However, what he did recall all was that Ricky was there to buy gas for a small red car, not the green station wagon. This guy doesn't seem like he's the most reliable witness, so police aren't really getting any further in their preliminary information gathering. At this point, they do think it's important to talk to Bruce since he was the last person to see his family that we know of. So, investigators go down to the high school, and the 15-year-old is a typical 15-year-old. They ask him, "What did your dad say? What's the story?" And he said the same thing that he told his mom. "My dad said he was going to be gone for a few hours. He needed to go to Minnesota Twin City area to Menards to get building supplies. He said he expected his dad to be home by that evening." As they are continuing to interview people, they find out that Ricky had done a few jobs for some people in the community the past week or so, and nothing was out of the ordinary. After they were done making their rounds, they pretty much verified all the information I've already given you. Everyone sort of said the same thing: where he usually goes, what he usually does. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but not letting anyone know where he was going was a little odd. But they figured, let's wait till the 27th, because remember, he's got the flea market unit reserved. He also had a $300 advance given to him from a farmer in the area for fencing work that was set to be done. So they still have a lot of hope that this family is going to come back, that they're not really missing. So they wait until the 27th. And you know, we wouldn't be talking about this case if they had shown up, but the fact is they never did. Ricky never made it to the flea market on the 27th. So now, this investigation has definitely shifted. They're taking it a lot more seriously. They have a family of 5 that is practically vanished into thin air. This is not normal. Now it's time for investigators to look into the mobile home and try to find out if there's anything missing, if there could be any clue to their whereabouts. So they go ahead and they do a search, and they find out that pretty much everything has been left behind. It doesn't seem like any of their young daughter's belongings have been taken, but they do notice Ruth Ann's purse is gone, and of course, the station wagon. Those were the only things they could confirm were missing. As time is passing, Bruce has become more and more concerned about what's happening with his family, especially his father. There has been more time for everyone to think and to talk about the different possibilities that could have happened. And Bruce tells investigators he remembers something that could be of significance. When Bruce was there with the police as they were going through the mobile home, they asked Bruce if he thought that anything looked out of the ordinary. He said, well, not necessarily. However, that's when Alice kind of piped up and was like, wait a minute. When Bruce called me and told me that his dad was gone, he said something. He said he could sense that someone had been in the trailer, like the feeling you get in your gut that someone's been there. And this is a real thing. People do have these gut feelings that their privacy has been invaded. Even though he didn't see anything missing, it seemed like things were maybe moved around, or items were misplaced, or almost as though someone had rummaged around looking for something. So they asked him, well, do you know anyone who would want to steal anything, hurt your family, or your dad's girlfriend, or kids? Do you know anyone that would want to do something like that? And Bruce was like, no. But he's thinking back, and the only thing that comes to mind is something that happened about a month earlier. And he says, well, I was home alone in the trailer. So someone knocked at the door. I opened it, and it was a man. He wanted to know where my dad was. So he tells the guy, who was a complete stranger to him, my dad's not home. Bruce is not quoting word for word, but he's basically telling the police that this guy kind of insinuated that Ricky owed him some money and that he was going to come back and collect it. Bruce, who was concerned, obviously, he tells his father this. His father's like, well, what did he say? And he said he just laughed and told Bruce it wasn't even a big deal. Well, this does pique investigators' interest. They want to know what Ricky's lifestyle was like. I mean, I can clearly see he's not a man of many means. And they could see as well the living conditions inside the trailer were not the best. So as they're questioning Alice and other people close to Ricky, they do find out that the family was struggling financially. They were living in this double-wide trailer. He was working 3 jobs. And as they're digging more into his personal life, they do find out how protective he was over his girlfriend and his girls, and how it wasn't common for him to want to leave them there if he was going for an extended trip or even away for the night. We already know all this. Nevertheless, we don't know everything about Ricky. It's possible Ricky had borrowed money from the wrong person, and now they have sought revenge of some kind and taken him and his family when he can't pay the loan. It's possible. Anything is possible at this point. They can't rule it out. So the investigators' next step is Menards in Minnesota, where Ricky, Ruth Ann, Mindy, Heidi, and Crystal were supposed to be going. The investigators asked Menards to see the records from April 22nd so they could search to see if Ricky purchased any supplies that day. It's 1991. Pulling records from weeks ago would take a lot of work, but the store promised they would get back to investigators as soon as they could. And eventually, someone from Menards did contact the Polk County Sheriff's Office, and they said, "We don't have any credit card transactions or checks that were made by Ricky or Ruth Ann on April 22nd. And as a matter of fact, they don't have any in the past week or so. However, if they would have paid in cash, there would not be a record because they could have paid in cash. They know that Ricky just got a cash advance for a job that he's planning to have done, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that they did pay with cash. Anything is possible still. Or they could have gotten in a car accident. Maybe someone saw them paying in cash and thought, hey, they have some money. Maybe they robbed them. Maybe the family got hurt. Maybe they just got lost on their way to the job that he was supposed to be doing. But at this point, they're going into May. It's time for investigators to get out there and start combing the area all around Sterling Township. And it was very heavily wooded. They also want to route the road between Sterling Township and Menards to see if the car went off the side of the road, if anything suspicious can be found, if anyone along the way could have seen this family. You really can't miss a family of 5. They also entered the 1980 Oldsmobile station wagon into a database so that if any car is matching that description or pulled over, they would be searched. Investigators combed through the neighborhood, all the roads leading to different trails, pathways, driveways in the Sterling Township area, and the farmers combed their farms. There were people from the community out there looking. This was a big story in the area. It was the top of the news and the front page of the newspapers. Everyone was starting to become very concerned. Even the Associated Press had gotten word of it. So this is big news. How could a family just disappear and leave behind their 15-year-old son? It's terrifying. It doesn't happen. Nobody expects it to happen. And anyone with a family, which is basically everyone, every single one of us, we're relating to this thinking, what if something were to happen to my family? So, everyone is spreading the word. They're talking about it. Wherever you go, you're hearing about this family that went missing. That's a good thing. Not that they went missing, but that people are spreading the word, because the more widespread the story is, the more likely investigators will get a lead in the case. They are about to, and it's not good news. Polk County Sheriff's Office gets a call from a trout fisherman. He's calling from Sterling Township. He was on his way back through a wooded area to a trout stream, and he came across a vehicle. And because of the widespread coverage of the story, this trout fisherman was able to determine that this station wagon matched the description of Ricky's vehicle. But the vehicle was burned. Investigators go out there, and immediately the first thing they notice is that this burned-out vehicle is only 3 miles away from Ricky's double-wide. All that was left was the frame of the station wagon. There are so many questions. Did the vehicle swerve off the road like many people thought? Did they get in an accident? Did the car blow up? But this was just unbelievable. But at the same time, this is their biggest lead now. They had something that they could actually investigate. But as they're doing a walk around of this vehicle, something stands out. There are no license plates on it. A couple of things are happening right now. One, they can't actually identify this car as belonging to Ricky. But it doesn't matter. The investigators didn't have to have a license plate to identify it. They knew that this was the station wagon. And it's not looking good, because the other thing it meant was that someone removed those license plates. Was it Ricky? Was he really in some kind of really bad financial situation, and he burned his vehicle for insurance purposes? That was highly unlikely. They knew that this car had been dumped there. And when I say dumped, what I mean is they found an unburned shovel inside the frame of the station wagon. And that is what led them to believe that someone had been there after the fire had stopped burning. Because this is such a heavily wooded area, the vehicle had not been found. Plus, they weren't looking for a burnt car frame, they were looking for a distinctive green station wagon in working condition. And at this point, this is a crime scene. So they got the tape going up, the teams are coming in, they're photographing everything. And you know, I'm going to tell you what they find. They find shoe prints on the back driver's side door. So not the driver's door, but the one behind it. This is a 4-door vehicle. The footprint was on the exterior, and they could ascertain that it was put there after the fire had stopped. After this car had been in an inferno, someone went up and they kicked that door, leaving a shoe print behind. Another thing they found was the back bumper had blood on it. Blood that survived this fire. All 4 of the tires were totally burned down to the pads. Nothing was left. Everything is gone. There's nothing inside, no upholsteries left over, all the plastics are burned, the dashboard, everything's gone. The thing is, when you're dealing with a fire, there is evidence to be found. Every single aspect of that vehicle, and how it burned and what's in the ashes, is going to paint its own picture of exactly what happened. Forensics is absolutely fascinating to me. There's always going to be a specialist in every single type of forensics. And not only that, the investigators suspected this was not just a fire, it was an arson. They found a gas can inside of the burned-out vehicle. They could also tell that someone drove the car with a key. This wasn't the case where somebody hot-wired the vehicle, took off the dashboard, something like that. But the most disturbing piece of evidence that the investigators discovered was in the back of the station wagon. That's where they found that shovel. And among all the ashes and the debris, they thought that they found what looked like bone fragments. These were just investigators that do crime scenes as a whole. These were not specialists. So now they know they need to call in an anthropologist. So they get an expert from the University of Wisconsin to help them collect these fragments, to find out if they're bone, and if they are they human in nature? An anthropologist came out, and not only were these bone fragments human, but this anthropologist was able to determine, with their specific professional expertise, that it was the bones of 2 adults and at least 2 juveniles. It is just devastating because these investigators, they don't even need to positively identify bodies as far as they're concerned, because everything is adding up. And when they're adding it all up, they're realizing that this is the family that they're looking for in 1991. It's not like the DNA top technology was at some point where it is now, where they can make these perfect conclusions. So instead, what they end up having to do is literally get on their hands and knees and sift through all of these fragments, every single particle that's in that charred vehicle, to find teeth, and as many teeth as they can find, because they need to use dental records to determine whose remains were located in that vehicle. At this point, they have also determined this is a homicide. This is not an accidental death. And one of the reasons why they determined that was because when they examined the entire vehicle, the front seat didn't have any human remains in it. All of the fragments were located in the back of the vehicle. So to them, This meant the driver had taken the bodies to that area and burned the vehicle to the ground with the bodies inside. There were so many questions at this point, but the homicide department has now taken over the case. This investigation is getting even more intense. There were 97 different dental fragments found in this vehicle, and sadly, the dental records did confirm that the remains of Ricky and Ruth Ann were located in that vehicle. However, because the children were so young, they didn't have a lot of dental work done, so they didn't have a lot of dental records. Examination of the fragments confirmed that the teeth belonged to different children. There were some pieces that matched a 5-year-old, and Crystal was 5, and other fragments that were consistent with children that were in the age range of 7 to 8 and 10 to 11, which approximately matched both Heidi and Mindy's ages. And the thing that I found equally fascinating and disturbing was that while these dental fragments were being examined, some of Ricky's had lead in them. So this meant that this lead actually came from a bullet and it had been lodged in that part of his teeth. Investigators knew this was most likely from a shot to the head. This is an absolutely horrific crime. Someone just eliminated an entire family, 3 of which were minors. The residents in Cushing are absolutely terrified. They are haunted by the fact that this family was not only killed, they were burned in their own vehicle just 3 miles away from their home, and their son, Bruce, is now left behind. The community is there. They're supporting this family as much as they possibly can. Social workers are coming out to assist Alice with Bruce, offering him counseling and a chance for Bruce to get any kind of assistance that he needed. They also needed him to be in a good state of mind, or the best state of mind that they could get him in, because they needed to ask him questions. He was the one that lived with his family. If they had any follow-up questions, they needed him to kind of be on his game. I mean, this poor kid was grieving, but at the same time, he's one of their most important components to this case, and they knew there was going to be a lot of questions. But of course, Alice was being very protective over her son, which is to be expected. However, they were willing to make time for police investigators any time they needed to question Bruce. And they did. The only thing that stood out was that man that came looking for Ricky before his murder. So based on Bruce's story, the investigators concluded someone killed Ricky in revenge for some kind of outstanding debt. Just like many of the other cases, the media is going wild. More information is getting out to the community, and more tips are coming. And someone reported that there's graffiti, not just graffiti but satanic graffiti on this temple. This is about 10 miles away from Cushing, and the graffiti said, "Devil worship, death by fire," and then it was signed with the letters SITN. And because the family was burned, and a lot of satanic rituals include fires, there was this rumor, if you can call it that, or this idea that the graffiti on this temple was connected to these murders. Well, they can't just leave any stone unturned. They had to call in, I swear this is real, a satanic expert. I mean, like I said, there are experts in everything, and they were trying to identify what those strange letters were, and they couldn't figure it out. To me, I just thought it was like kind of an acronym for Satan, even though there's an I like SITN, Satan. I don't know. That's not my expertise. But in 1991, the satanic panic was at its height. Throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, there was widespread panic regarding satanic ritual-related crimes. Many of the over 12,000 claims of these types of crimes were supported and substantiated by Christian fundamentalists, social workers, law enforcement officers. Several cases of these alleged satanic crimes ended with actual convictions. For example, the alleged satanic rituals of the McMartin preschool trial, or the West Memphis 3, they became infamous, and they were widespread, bringing a lot of media attention. And so for the residents of Cushing, it wasn't hard for them to believe that a deranged, devil-worshipping stranger committed this crime because they didn't want to believe it was one of their own. They didn't want to believe it was someone that actually lived among them. It's got to be a devil worshipper. Investigators started questioning the residents about satanic cults, or if they knew people who were involved in worshiping the devil. Well, actually, they ended up interviewing some friends who go to school with Bruce. And these friends say they think that Bruce buys marijuana from some guy who has a satanic background. Now you can't believe every single tip, but they, once again, had to look into it. They found out this wasn't warranted, they dropped it. The whole satanic investigation was over after this. There wasn't anything conclusive that linked ISM to what happened to this family. However, when they were interviewing these friends, they said maybe the marijuana dealer who is a Satanist was the one that came to the door and wanted money. It didn't go anywhere, but as they're interviewing these friends, they stumble upon someone who's very close to Bruce, and her name is Katie Han. She's a friend of Bruce's because she's dating Jesse, which is Bruce's stepbrother. Remember him? He's 17 years old at the time. They've grown up together, they're very close. Well, Katie is close to Jesse, and therefore, just by proximity, she's close to Bruce. So investigators are very interested in talking to her about the marijuana situation and other things like, what does she know about these boys? What does she know about Bruce? This was 6 days after that vehicle was found, and the investigators bring Katie in for questioning. She lets them know that even though they're not blood brothers, these brothers are very close. They're confidants, they're best friends. Bruce looks up to Jesse, and they really should be talking to Jesse because he knows everything about Bruce's life, everything about what goes on at Ricky's house. One thing she said is that both Jesse and Bruce seemed to be very concerned about everything that was going on, rightfully so. But not just that, they were kind of annoyed with the way that police were interviewing all their friends and their family members. She thought that it looked as though they were worried, but you know what? Everybody grieves in different ways. That's what they say. Nevertheless, they're going to have to interview Jesse anyway because now they're thinking, does Jesse have some kind of involvement in this? And if so, Katie says they have a strong bond. They don't do anything without letting the other one know. Investigators think now is a good time to question Jesse, so they arrange to meet with him and his father, Ron, at their home. When they asked Jesse, "What do you know?" he told them everything that Bruce had already told them, everything that we already know, saying that's what Bruce relayed to him. But the more the investigators kind of pressed Jesse, he gets upset, he's uncomfortable, and his dad is there, and they keep giving each other looks like, I don't really want to be here. It came off as kind of aggressive, defensive. He didn't want to answer certain things, and at one point Jesse's dad says, "You know what? We're going to go talk in another room out of the presence of the investigators for a moment." They were talking for 15 minutes. Ron Anderson comes back with his son, and he says, "You know what? We're going to need to consult with an attorney, which I don't actually think is a bad idea. Just so you know, this is a murder investigation. It's a big deal. This is a serious crime. Your minor child is being interviewed about said crime. So they say before making any further statements, we want to get an attorney." Is this suspicious? I don't know. I don't think we should think it is, but investigators think it is. Yes, they're always looking for holes in people's stories. And not only that, when they were interviewing another friend that knew Bruce, he said that Bruce was acting strange. Again, we know the whole people grieve in different ways, but they said that they saw Bruce selling some of the items that belonged to his family. Not necessarily suspicious because, this boy is not very well off. His dad even sold miscellaneous items at the flea market. However, they get information that Bruce was spending coins, and these coins weren't just, spare change like in the couch cushions. These were collectible. They were a collection of coins that his father considered his prized possessions. Apparently, Bruce had been at an arcade, and he was just using these coins like they were ordinary ones. Now, did a 15-year-old know the difference? I don't know, but is this strange? I kind of think it is, and investigators thought it was. It also turns out Bruce had been giving away his family's possessions. Now, I know I have heard stories, don't know if you have, where people don't want to be surrounded by certain things because it brings back too many memories, so they decide to get rid of things. Everyone's different, but he's giving away TVs and stereos, and he makes a weird statement to one of his friends. He tells them, "I now have 3 cars of my own." and this was when his family members were just reported missing. He's saying this as though he knows that his dad's not coming back, that his family is not going to be using these cars. But is it true? They don't know. They need to find out more. This witness also said, if you want to know more, you need to ask who. Oh, Jesse Anderson. There's that name again, Bruce's stepbrother. So now we're circling back. We know that he wants to get an attorney. He's not going to be talking. But is it? Well, in that case, we did not know as much as we're going to find out in this case. You're going to find out details because someone knows what happened. This is the portion of the video where everything falls into place and comes together, and it's going to happen fast. Everything is coming to the surface. They want to set up another interview with Jesse and his attorney. They don't care that the attorney will be there, but before they can even do that, on May 18th, Jesse and his father let investigators know Jesse wants to cooperate. There's something that he wants to tell you. I have a lot of comments on this later, but let's just hear what Jesse has to say, and he's going to have a lot to say. He's like a diary of the mouth at this point. But the first thing that Jesse lets them know is that Bruce doesn't exactly get along with his father. Many teenage boys don't. Investigators had already been interviewing close friends and family, and yes, they'd heard about the normal father-son argument, strictness, so on and so forth. But Jesse takes it one step further. He says that Bruce hates having to go to his father's mobile home. He pretty much hates his father. Remember I told you that the trailer wasn't exactly in ship shape? Well, it's a mess. It's an absolute disaster, and Bruce was sick of it. It infuriated him to have to live in what he considered filth. It was a disgusting environment as far as he was concerned, and I admit I looked at it. There are things everywhere. You can see, you can't even see the floor. Here's the actual video from the trailer, so you can get an idea of what Bruce is talking about. Jesse also says that Ricky isn't the best father to Bruce. He treats Bruce differently than he treats the girls. It's kind of like Bruce is the outcast of the family. And not only that, Jesse said that Ruth Ann didn't like Bruce and wanted him out of the trailer. He said that the living conditions weren't just about being dirty and messy. There were times when Bruce didn't have electricity, no plumbing, no running water, and he would get into arguments with Ricky about this. Bruce said he was constantly being manipulated by Ricky, that he would make all these promises that he couldn't keep, and he was sick of it. In the mind of a 15-year-old, he was fed up, so he tells Jesse he wants to kill his father. When investigators asked Jesse, "Well, what did you think when Bruce was telling you all this?" Jesse says, "I thought he was joking." It wasn't the first time that Bruce had said things like that, and even laughed about things like that he hated his father, that he hated Ruth Ann, that he hated visiting his father and trying to sleep in this dumpy double-wide trailer with 3 screaming little girls. Not only that, Bruce had something else to say. He asked Jesse, "Do you have anything to help me carry out this crime?" Because Bruce had a rifle, but he needed ammunition, and guess what? Jesse gave it to him. And I'm sitting there thinking, you really didn't think he was serious, but you're giving this 15-year-old boy ammunition. Why would you do that? Well, investigators want to know, but then the attorney kind of stops him and says, "You know, Jesse has a lot more to say, but the thing is, he doesn't want to get in trouble because, this is a major case. So he wants immunity, full immunity. And I don't always agree with this, most times I don't, but I understand they want information and this person has it. But full immunity? Well, they're that desperate, and it seems he's the only one with answers. Bruce isn't talking, so they grant Jesse full immunity for the rest of his story, and the rest of his story is insane. Jesse says, though, on April 22nd, him and Bruce went to school like they usually do. They go to the same high school, but after school that afternoon, Bruce called Jesse up and he said, "I did it. I killed them all." Jesse knew exactly who he was referring to: Ricky, Ruth Ann, Mindy, Heidi, and Crystal, his own family members. But then, Bruce goes on, and according to Jesse, he tells him in detail all of the gruesome acts that he carried out when he was murdering his family. Bruce got home from school, and Ruth Ann's daughters, Heidi and Mindy, were there. They had just gotten off the bus. Ricky and Ruth Ann were out with Crystal, their little 5-year-old. And this is what Jesse said Bruce did. Bruce tied up the two girls and dragged them outside behind the trailer. And since they're minors, I'm not going to be able to go into detail about what exactly occurred. Use your imagination with the fact that you know what he collected from Jesse in order to carry out this crime? Yes, he used that on these two poor innocent girls, cold and calculated and heartless. Then Bruce walked back into the trailer and stood in his bedroom at his bedroom window, looking outside, just waiting for his father to come home. The window was open and Bruce was holding the weapon outside of the window, pointing it straight to where the parking area was. And when he saw his dad and Ruth Ann pull up with Crystal, this next part disgusts me. Ricky could see Bruce through the window and he said, "What are you doing with a rifle?" And Bruce, according to Jesse, replied, "Hi, Dad," before shooting him twice. Ricky collapsed to the floor. Ruth Ann, realizing that this is a deadly situation, she runs inside, hoping that she can save her daughters, but she doesn't realize that they're already gone, except for Crystal. But as she runs into that trailer and she's just frantically trying to get to the phone, she gets a hold of that receiver in her hand, and she's shaking. She's trying to call 911, and Bruce, he walks out of his bedroom and into the living room, and he just tears that phone right out of the wall. He points the weapon at Ruth Ann and tells her to go outside of the trailer. At that point, she tries to run, but she couldn't outrun Bruce, and he shot her in the back of the head. I'm not going to go into detail about what happened to Crystal, but she did walk around to the back of the trailer where all the commotion was going on, and she saw everything. She saw everything that happened to her loved ones, and Bruce followed her and he did the same thing to her. After that, I don't know how to get right back into the story, but I found this next part to be interesting. These people, they do not have much money. I don't know what it was like for you back in the day when you had a phone in your house, but this is a small trailer. Maybe they had more than one phone, but okay. Remember Bruce tore the phone out of the wall so that nobody could use it? Well, Jesse says that he knows all of this information because after everything was done, that's when he gets a call from Bruce. So what phone did he use? I'm just curious because something doesn't add up for me. But let's proceed because Jesse's story keeps going. Bruce, like I said, calls him up, tells him he did it, and then says, "I need your help. Get to the trailer." Jesse says when he gets out there and he sees the absolute carnage that Bruce caused his family, he starts to vomit everywhere because he's so disgusted by what his stepbrother did. Nevertheless, blood is not thicker than water in this case. Stepbrothers' bonds are stronger than blood, apparently, and Jesse decides he's going to help Bruce carry all 5 bodies to the back of the station wagon. They use a wheelbarrow to load the remains into the car. Then both Jesse and Bruce walked around to every location where her body had been, and they made sure that there was no bloody sand left behind. They were actually taking a shovel and scooping up anything, any fragments, any substance, any tissue, and they disposed of that as well. Then they decide, okay, we're going to take this car and we're going to drive it into the woods and we're going to set it on fire. Well, Jesse's not having it. He's not going anywhere near those remains. According to him, he's like, "Not me, that's all you." Instead, he says he drives the Hyundai and follows Bruce. They go those 3 miles to that area where the car was found. That's when they take the license plates off. They take those with them, they get a can of gasoline, and they dump it all over the station wagon. And Jesse says he watched as Bruce lit a match, took a piece of paper, lit that piece of paper on fire, and threw that piece of paper into that vehicle, and stood there watching it burn. And when it's done and the fire is out, he drives his little stepbrother to a pond where Bruce throws the rifle inside. Jesse says that the two of them were absolutely speechless, that they did not utter one word to one another. They were like zombies. I don't know if they could even comprehend what they had done at that moment, but neither one spoke to one another, according to Jesse, until the next day when they do end up talking again. It was the following morning when they saw each other at school. This is also one of the most sickening things that I read about in the story. But Jesse says he tells Bruce that he could not sleep that night, and Bruce responds, "Oh, I slept like a baby because there was no one at the house making any noise." And then he tells investigators that he's not sure what day it was, but several days later they decided to go back where the vehicle is to make sure that everything is totally burned. That's when they realize there are some very large bone fragments that are left behind, so they decided to gather up all the big pieces, their bones and skeleton, and they put them in a duffel bag that they brought with them. Jesse also lets them know that he finds what he thinks is a child's skull, and that he picks it up out of the vehicle and throws it into the duffel bag as well. They bring all the stuff to Jesse's dad's house on the farm, and they go out to the back of the barn where there's a cornfield, and they bury the license plates, and they bury the blue duffel bag with the rest of the skeletal remains inside. When the investigators first heard that Jesse wanted to talk to him, they thought that he was going to, minimize his involvement in the crime. I personally still think he is, and you just wait. They thought he was going to say, "Oh yeah, I gave him the bullets, and I don't know much else." But it turns out everything that he said matched the evidence that had been collected. So in their mind, this story was true, but we're not at trial. This is not an entire examination or a comparison of the evidence in its entirety. We're not talking statements side by side with the evidence, but this is all they know, and they're taking it as truth. I still had a lot of questions, but they did obtain a search warrant to search the property at Ron Anderson's, Jesse's father's house, and during the search they stumbled upon a notebook in Bruce's bedroom. Remember, Bruce spent half the time living there inside this diary, if you will. Bruce vented all of his anger in there regarding his father and Ruth Ann, and it even contained several entries with threats on Ricky's life. At this point, this is enough for investigators to issue a probable cause arrest warrant for Bruce Bernizer for the murder of his family. It was May 18th, 1991, and Bruce was arrested. He showed no emotions. This is him right here. However, after they started to connect more and more of the dots, it turns out that Bruce was very apprehensive every single time Jesse was being interviewed because he expressed a fear that he thought that Jesse was going to blame the murders on him. After the arrest, Jesse Anderson and the prosecution reached their plea agreement that he would testify on behalf of the state. All that he had to do now was lead police to the rifle, the duffel bag, and the license plates, and he does just that. There's no doubt that this rifle belonged to Bruce because it had the initials BB engraved on the side of it. Those are obviously Bruce's initials. However, can I just point something out? Anyone can use this weapon. It doesn't matter whose initials are on it, I'm just saying. But additionally, one of the bullets found outside the trailer did match the weapon. When they do walk around the trailer, investigators found evidence in the grass and on the sand. There were fragments of skull and bleach. After they did some DNA testing, this was proven to be the skull fragments of Crystal. After committing this crime, Bruce poured bleach on the ground and in the duffel bag, thinking that this would somehow take away the evidence. There was other information that started to come out in those notebooks from Bruce himself, like the fact that Jesse told Bruce to take care of his family outside the trailer so he wouldn't make a mess inside. When confronted about this, Jesse said, "Yeah, I just told him what I would do if that were my situation." Now, Ruth Ann's mom, Mary, she comes forward and she told the media that her daughter Ruth Ann had told her that she and the girls would be moving in with her if Ricky did not order his son to move out. So there's definitely tension in that home. She also said she thought Jesse was way more involved, and she is pissed because she doesn't think it's okay that Jesse is granted full immunity. She said that this was letting him off too easily, that he was a participant in this massacre and everything except for the actual shooting. But he helped Bruce plan how to commit the murders, even to the point of advising him to shoot them outside, right? Obviously, yes. Further, providing him with ammunition, loading the bodies, bringing them out to the location, getting rid of all the evidence, basically covering up this entire crime. She believed prosecutors could have convinced Jesse to turn on Bruce without such a lenient deal. Having to see a man who helped set the bodies of 3 young girls on fire walking the streets was just unbelievable, according to Ruth Ann's family. Mary knew more about Jesse than the police did. Her daughter had told her that Bruce would do whatever Jesse wanted. Bruce was a follower, not a leader. Those were her words. She said that Ruth Ann used to tell her Bruce would always go along with Jesse. Jesse was like an idol to Bruce. Bruce was a kind of loner, and he found some kind of deep friendship with Jesse. Well, the Polk County District Attorney Mark Biller, he defended the full immunity grant. He said, this was the only way. It was the break that we needed. I don't know, maybe better police work could have worked. Maybe better interrogation skills with Bruce. I don't know. The judge ruled, and there's more to this, that Bruce would be tried as an adult while his attorneys did not like that at all. They thought it was unfair. But the district attorney made it clear that this was something that they did not decide lightly, based on the public interest and just how heinous this crime was. Prosecutors charged Bruce with 5 counts of first-degree murder, and Alice is still there for her son, as the judge had dismissed everyone. Alice ran up and hugged and kissed Bruce, just as the bailiffs were leading him out of the courtroom. The court decided to uphold the ruling that Bruce would be charged as an adult in adult court. He's an adult because he did an adult crime, and that the trial would be sometime at the end of 1992. I'd like to mention other little arguments. The district attorney argued that Bruce should move from a juvenile facility where he was being held to a county prison. They wanted him to put his big boy pants on because there was also less of a chance that Bruce would flee from a prison. That was the argument at the time, and he remained there. The judge ruled that he was to remain there, and his bail was set at $500,000. On the second anniversary of the crimes, Ricky's brother Wayne reflected and said that he thinks about Ricky all the time. And although he wants to move forward, he can't help but wonder why this had to happen. And according to him, Ricky had a really hard time ending his first marriage and he vowed to never marry again. However, when he met Ruth Ann, they just belonged together. Both families were upset. They were upset that this murder trial had been postponed for 2 years, and the judge did apologize for all the delays, and they were justified because it was necessary to determine whether Bruce would be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. But then, Bruce's current defense attorney requested to be dismissed from the case, and on top of that, the prosecutor's mother passed away. So I guess it's understandable that it was postponed. So now Bruce's trial was set to start in the summer of 1993, but in April of that year, he reached a plea agreement. It was 2 years to the day of the crime. Bruce pleaded guilty to the murder of Ricky and Ruth Ann, but guilty by reason of insanity for the girls. The judge handed down 2 consecutive life terms. Whether Bruce was going to spend the rest of his life in a mental institution or prison was up to this judge. And basically, Bruce's argument was that he felt it was more humane to end the girls' lives because of what he was going to do or what he had done to their parents. The reason in Bruce's mind, or what he relayed, was that this was self-preservation. That's what his attorney was arguing, that these killings were motivated by his past, what his father had done to him physically and emotionally, and that he could no longer be treated this way. According to his defense attorneys, it was the culmination of a lifetime of mistreatment, that he was forced to live in a place with no electricity, no plumbing, no running water, and that he was threatened and manipulated by his dad, that Ricky would hit walls and bully his family into submission or threaten them to get them not to leave, and that this happened at least once a week. Bruce said he would also promise gifts or say that he was going to take his own life to manipulate him, and this included his dad suspending himself from a tree or putting antlers on his head and running into the woods during deer hunting season. Again, according to Bruce, he became a scapegoat for his family's problems, that he endured this regular emotional trauma and said that Ruth Ann wouldn't even talk to him. She would just stare at him with loathing. That his father's favorite object to use on him was a broom handle. What do you think of all this? When Ruth Ann's mom heard about this and the way that Bruce was accusing Ruth Ann of looking at him, she wanted to remind everyone that her daughter was blind in one eye. If she was looking at you in a weird way, It's because she probably had trouble seeing you. She couldn't focus correctly. It's not because she's trying to give you a dirty look, as if that's even something to justify what Bruce did. Any of this? The judge had ruled that when Bruce murdered Mindy, Heidi, and Crystal, he declared him legally insane. He was sent to a mental health institution in Madison, Wisconsin. But here are some other interesting facts before I close with something else I found out about Bruce that is more recent. In 1995, a reporter from the Wisconsin State Journal saw Bruce. This reporter was out at a movie theater, and so was Bruce. He was being escorted by someone from this mental institution, and there was a public outcry. But the psychiatrists at the hospital, they defended their actions, and they claimed that these outings were essential for the patient's recovery. According to the doctors, when you lock someone in a room, it's not how you treat mental illness. And for years, Bruce went on these outings. In the year 2000, Bruce made the news again, and this time as an alleged victim. That's right, a 35-year-old registered nurse in Casa Grande was transferred to Bruce's unit in the mental institution, and the two of them began a very inappropriate sexual relationship in 1998, and she was charged with 2 counts of sexual misconduct, and the judge ordered her to serve 60 days of house arrest. It was wrong, but her defense claimed she was in love with Bruce. She would send him very naughty photographs and letters expressing her desires to be with him, and she also made videos. No matter where she was working in the hospital, she always found a way to get in contact with Bruce. And during one of her 8-hour shifts, she spent 6 of those hours with him. They were doing it everywhere. They were doing it in the medication room, in the leisure rooms, in the psychiatric. At one time, when he went on a picnic outing, she gave him vodka. This woman definitely had her medical license revoked. In 2013, Bruce was transferred from the mental institution to a state prison. But 4 years later, the court overturned this decision, and Bruce returned to the mental hospital, where he remains today. Now look at this gem that I found. It is basically a prison dating site. I mean, it's not. It's actually a prison pen pal site. Don't get it wrong. But look at this. Look at this little picture of Bruce. It looks like he's wearing a silk nightgown. On the side of the website, there are tabs. They say Meet Bruce, More About Bruce, Contact Information, Sentence Information. Yeah, they're going to put that last because they want you to read what Bruce has to say first. So let's read it. At the point I'm writing this, he's 47 years old. Okay, it also says that his profile will end on July 23rd, 2023. I wonder why. Well, before I get into that, let's meet Bruce. Here's what he has to say. I'm going to put some music under it so you know it's him still talking, and when I'm done, it'll stop. First of all, I don't want your money. I do need your compassion, companionship, and caring. Love is love, and my heart doesn't discriminate. I'm interested in any age, race, religion, etc. I'm a deep-feeling and sensitive man. Unfortunately, being locked up forces me to suppress those feelings. It is far too often that I must deny myself the feelings that grant me access to my greatest humanity. Despite the barriers to a normal relationship, I want and need someone in my life with whom it is safe to experience and share the depth of my emotions. I'm no fool. I know someone with a life sentence and no guarantee of parole isn't a desirable companion, but I can hope. I've spent the past 30 years trying to make amends for what I've done. Equal parts guilt and joy drive me to do whatever I can to alleviate the suffering of others, or preferably prevent it altogether. Unfortunately, the joy is ephemeral, and the guilt anchors me to actions that I can never make up for. I'm an intelligent man, always looking for ways to stimulate my mind. I'm always on to the next thing once a challenge or the moment is conquered. However, this doesn't apply to people. I make few friends, but those friendships are deep and abiding. You would honor me by responding to my profile. I look forward to building either a platonic friendship or an inmate romantic relationship, whatever suits us best. End quote. Wow, he's suppressing his emotions and feelings. I think there's another word for that I'm not going to get into. But yes, I'm sure there are certain things he can't express when he's locked up. Okay, so they give you his contact information, which I'm not going to provide up on the screen, because you can do that if you're really interested in writing him. That's not why I'm telling you all this information. I just thought that this was interesting. Bruce will be eligible for parole in 2023. Yes, this monster may be walking the streets again. What are your thoughts? Tell all. I just think about those little girls in their last moments, and there's really nothing that I want to say out loud, but the thoughts in my head haunt me. College is often seen as one of the most thrilling phases in a person's academic journey, a time to gain independence, forge lifelong friendships, and perhaps even encounter a soulmate. Yet for one student, it would be their last chapter. Andrea Del Vesco was full of excitement about starting her final year at UCLA. She never could have imagined her story would end so suddenly. But before we get into this, please let me just take one moment to introduce you to Andrea Lauren Del Vesco. She was born in Chicago, Illinois, on June 29, 1994, to her parents Arthur and Leslie Del Vesco. Andrea was the middle child. She had an older brother, James, who was 2 years older than her at the time, and her younger sister, Lexis, came along 4 years later in 1998. They became a family of 5, a happy family, a close family, a loving family. Everything a family should be, that's what the Del Vescos were. Ultimately, they made their home out in Texas. Andrea's mother studied finance and marketing at Southern Methodist University. She worked at Merrill Lynch, had a job with American Airlines, and was a former account executive for residential mortgages at Citibank USA before becoming a stay-at-home mom. Arthur Del Vesco, Andrea's father, owns Del Vesco Family Investments, a holding and investment company. Andrea's family was well off. Her father was able to provide a very comfortable life and then some. But let's not let that cloud our vision on what's irreplaceable, no matter how much money someone has, and that's life. It's true that Andrea's father worked very hard and had a good income. I'm gauging this off a few things: the company he operates, the industry it's in, the pictures I've seen, and the home they owned. Mostly the last one, the home. The Del Vescos lived in a subdivision called Glen Lake, which is part of Travis County in Austin. Look at the road into the Del Vescos' neighborhood. Now, here's the front gate of their property. There were so many different websites with information about this house. Some said it had 11 bathrooms, so I have no idea how many bedrooms it would have had with 11 bathrooms. Other websites said it only had 9, and I've seen as low as 7. But one consistent fact is that it was around 10,000 square feet, and I'm pretty sure they had it built. I can't be sure how much they spent on it, but some sites were appraising it at $13 million, while others said $4 million. But really, I'm saying enough to say that it's a mansion to most of us. It's on almost 17 acres of land, and it has this winding driveway that leads up to the home. It even appears to have a lake on the property, as well as a swimming pool and possible guest homes. I can't be sure, but from what you can see from this bird's eye view, it's pretty big, with lots of land surrounding it. From what I've gathered during all of my research, this family was a good one. Arthur and Leslie were loving parents who instilled important values in their children. The DeVasco family was able to send their children to the best schools, which reinforced those values. They enrolled them at St. Andrew's Episcopal School, which is a K-2 school. The website says they empower scholars, artists, athletes, and servants since 1952. It's a private school with a dedicated faculty, a challenging academic program, fine and performing arts, competitive athletics, and a wide selection of extracurricular activities. Now, I mentioned it's an Episcopalian school, which focuses on chapel and religious tradition that's rooted in the Christian story of God's love and grace. No matter the person's, I guess you could call it, level of religious devotion. I know a variety of people send their children to Episcopalian schools for the quality of education. I've been told that they feel like it doesn't hurt that they're learning morals, even if they are religious-based. There were many of these schools where I'm from in Florida. Usually, they're popular among families that can afford to send their children there. All 3 of the DeVasco children were attending St. Andrew's, and they were thriving. During Andrea's high school career, she was a National Commended Merit Scholar. She won numerous awards for excelling in Latin, English, and Spanish. Andrea also excelled outside of the classroom, developing her leadership skills through her involvement in various extracurricular activities. She played field hockey and lacrosse for the varsity team at St. Andrews, and Leslie took note of Andrea's love for learning. She spent time reading, liked going to museums, enjoyed learning about art, but most of all, she was fascinated by people. She had a natural talent for being empathetic. She could feel others' feelings before they even told her how they felt. Since she was just in the first grade, she would never pass up the opportunity to volunteer, to lend a hand, and offer advice and support, even if it meant sacrificing her own time or resources. Her loyalty seemed to be unmatched. She was always there for those she cared about, no matter the cost. Her mom noticed that from a very young age, Andrea would know when her siblings were upset, and she was ready to comfort them. Leslie said that you could just see that she saw into your soul and understood exactly what you were going through. As I was learning all about Andrea, I got to know a lot about Leslie's nature and that of her other daughter, Alexis, Andrea's little sister. It became apparent to me that many of their qualities actually stemmed from what a caring, soft, and loving woman their mother was. She didn't just consider Andrea a daughter, she called her her best friend. They developed a very strong bond. Andrea once wrote her mother a letter that included these words: "Dear Mom, I love you with my whole heart, and I hope that I have inherited half of your strength. I will never love anyone as much as I love you." Her mom knew that Andrea was very special, that not many people had the capacity to love others the way that Andrea did. But it wasn't just her family that she extended her hands and her heart to. It was friends and also strangers. She enjoyed traveling, getting to know people, and learning about different cultures. For example, Andrea took a trip to Peru for her 16th birthday, when that's the day that you usually reserve for celebrating yourself. She spent that day helping villagers construct shelters by making bricks out of mud. This was a trip that she planned all on her own, and she spent 2 weeks camping in a tent, just exploring a different part of the world and the people who lived there. I could tell Andrea loved to have fun. I was looking at all her pictures of her growing up, like this one with her friends swinging off a rope into the water. They went rafting and boating, and she really looked like she enjoyed life. She had a great time with her friends, lots of laughing, and lots of pictures. Growing up, she was just adorable with this cute little smile and her shiny blonde hair. I could tell that she had a childhood full of activities, like horseback riding and vacations to the mountains. She created lots of memories with the people she loved the most. The way her dad was looking at her in this photo says everything without saying one word. Andrea made him proud. Her compassion set her apart more than anything, more than her straight A's or being on the honor society, even though those were accomplishments to be proud of. Andrew's parents were definitely proud of them. So was Alexis. She really looked up to her older sister. In Alexis's opinion, there was no one cooler than Andrea. She just said that there was something about her sister that drew you in, and Alexis admired Andrea's confidence, her grace, and her charisma. She felt like Andrea could do anything that she put her mind to, and she wanted to be just like her when she grew up. Whatever Andrea was doing, Alexis wasn't far behind. There were so many things to admire about Andrea. I read every single post on her Facebook and all the comments between her and her friends, and I got a clear picture of how witty she was. Andrea had a great sense of humor, and that, coupled with her adventurous spirit, enabled her to stand out. It was everything. It was the way that she dressed. Bright colors were her thing. Her funny outfits shocked and surprised her friends. She may have even acquired some of that uniqueness from attending St. Andrews, because it did focus on the performing arts. I could tell Andrea was the life of the party. You would know when she showed up because she would make sure of that. I'll tell you more about this because I think that as she grew more into her true self, she showed that, and that was when she was in college. But that was the next step in her life, something that she was looking forward to. After finishing her senior year in 2012, she had applied to a number of colleges, and Leslie was hoping that her daughter would choose the University of Chicago because her older brother, James, was studying there. Leslie felt like having two kids attending the same school would provide them with support and security. She knew that Andrea would be safe. But as each one of Andrea's acceptance letters came rolling in, Andrea wanted to wait until they all arrived before choosing which college she would attend. It's no surprise, with Andrea's love for adventure, that she wanted a challenge. She believed that you grow as a person when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. One of the last acceptance letters to come in was from UCLA, and Andrea knew that it would be a huge change, going from a small town in Austin out to Los Angeles. She was more than ready. She was excited to tell her mom that she chose UCLA, and of course, Leslie was so happy for her. She remembers giving her a big hug and congratulating her on her acceptance. But what was so strange is when Leslie left and got back into her car, she broke down in tears. It was something she couldn't understand. Why was she so overcome with sadness? She found herself sobbing so hard, and she really couldn't pinpoint what it stemmed from. However, once you find out what happens, I think you'll believe what Leslie now thinks happened to her. It was like she had some kind of premonition in that moment. Leslie truly didn't feel right about Andrea leaving for Los Angeles, but of course, she wanted to support her daughter, and Andrea was looking forward to double majoring in psychology and Spanish. When she told her mom what she would be studying, especially when she said psychology, Leslie thought, wow, that's the perfect career path for Andrea, someone who always had a love for people and was very compassionate. She was a natural. Andrea was also interested in helping people abroad and moving to a Spanish-speaking country one day so she could experience another culture. It was part of her fascination with how people thought and what made them think the way that they did. It wasn't long before Andrea was moving into the dorms on the UCLA campus with the help of her family. It was her freshman year in the fall of 2012, right after she graduated that summer. She went from high school right into college, her first real experience away from home, away from the safety and security of the people she knew and the place she grew up. Leslie had to leave her daughter behind, and as they said goodbye, she looked at her and said, "Honey, this is your opportunity to grow and to be whatever you want to be. It must be so hard to let go like that. There's so much uncertainty," but that excited Andrea like it does with many people. Everything is new, and this is Los Angeles. It's a dream come true to live here. It's everything. It's the weather, the people, the adventure. There's so much to do in California, especially if you're like Andrea and you love people and new things. It's got everything. The snowy mountains for skiing, the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, the sandy beaches, the nightlife, the desert life. There's so much to do. It really is the perfect place for college, when most people are trying new things and trying to experience the world, especially coming here for college. In a place like UCLA, there's so much to do. You really get the real college experience at UCLA in particular. The school is beautiful, just look at the campus. Plus, it's a really great school academically, which is really important. UCLA is a highly regarded public research university. Many graduates from UCLA received prestigious awards, including Nobel Prizes, and UCLA ranked along with UC Berkeley as the 20th best college in the country in October 2022. Many people dream of attending UCLA. It attracts students from around the world, and that's partly because of its picturesque campus. Looking at this university, you might even think it belongs in a movie, especially if it's from the early 2000s. The scenery is stunning. It kind of reminds me of something like Clueless. And then of course there are the traditions. For one, the sorority life, and that was definitely something Andrea wanted to be a part of. It's also something you have to plan for because rush week starts right away during the first week of school. So knowing which sorority you want to be a part of is important, and Andrea had her sights set on one in particular, Pi Beta Phi. These are social clubs on campus, ones that are exclusive to those who are chosen to be part of them. So you essentially have to try out, you have to audition. This is a big goal for many girls. They want to be part of a sisterhood, they want to meet friends for life, and instantly have people to bond with, sort of like a built-in support system. The same goes for fraternities when it comes to guys in college. They want to be part of the coolest ones that throw the biggest and best parties, and of course, Most of it is to impress the ladies. And, well, of course there is more to these groups than just partying. They do charity work, and they take part in many community-building activities. But for most college campuses, being a part of a fraternity or a sorority has its stigma. Pi Beta Phi helps young women achieve their full potential by fostering meaningful relationships with one another, and these relationships allow them to adapt to college by giving them a sense of belonging, support, and guidance. Their mission statement says, "We, the women of Pi Beta Phi, are dedicated to creating an inclusive space for all our women. We acknowledge our history, and we will continue to reflect and educate ourselves, listen to the experiences of those within marginalized groups, and support our community." The UCLA campus is located in an area called Westwood, and students say that it's one of the most perfect places for a college town. It feels small, even though you're part of LA. It's very inclusive, with many students living there for school, so there are students everywhere, working in local restaurants and bars. It feels like you're always in good company. Of course, the streets are lined with the infamous fraternity houses and Greek Row, where there are whole neighborhoods that have big block parties. Many students don't even lock their doors because they come in and out of each other's apartments to hang out. Everyone is very welcoming, and it's all within walking distance of UCLA's campus. Places like Westwood Village have shopping and dining. It's an entertainment complex with restaurants, theaters, and much more. It's not only that there's so much to do in Westwood, but it's also a safe area where college students feel comfortable walking home at night by themselves. Andrea, who was known by everyone as Andy, was ready to experience all of this and more. She could not wait for Rush Week. It's the first week of college, and sororities also have what is known as Bid Day. This signifies the end of recruitment, or rush, and it's when all the invitations to join the sororities are sent out, and the women extend a bid. They attend a party hosted by the sorority that they're accepted into, and they meet everyone. It's a fun night, where you get to meet and get to know all the girls that you're going to be spending the rest of your college years with. All the upperclassmen welcome their new members into the sisterhood. It's full of fun, and it's a lot of excitement. This was the day Andrea met some of the women who would become her best friends, including two, Jessica and Jackie. Andrea was the type of person who was very easy to get along with, so many people actually called her their best friend. Andrea had a unique combination of a great personality, good sense of humor, and enthusiasm. It made her presence unforgettable. It left everyone around her feeling uplifted and happy. She and Jessica clicked right away. It was like they had an instant connection. That's the way Jessica put it. It was Andrea's crazy sense of style that really made her stand out, and that was something Andrea would become very well known for. Her unique fashion sense, because it was a great conversation starter, and of course her positive energy. She always lightened the mood when she was around, and she brought everyone together. She was a valuable asset to her new sorority, since that's what it's all about, bringing everyone together. Andrea also clicked with Jackie right from the start. Jackie loved Andrea's sense of humor. She called her outrageous and over the top. Andrea made friends with everyone. That's the type of person she was. She was many people's first friend at UCLA. She made sure to give them attention, even at orientation, and those friendships stood the test of time, which was most likely due to the fact that Andrea was described as having a big heart and that her kindness was contagious. She was known as being one of the sweetest people, even to strangers. But maybe that can also be a flaw, being too nice, too open, too friendly, when not everyone out there is one of the good ones. But it was clear that Andrea was. She was one of the good ones. I told you that she really grew into herself and the person that she was meant to be when she was in college. More of her personality began to shine through. She developed things like a signature outfit, which was a giant fur coat, and she would end up spending Christmas morning 1 year riding bikes around the Google offices in Mountain View, California, with a friend wearing her big white coat. He snapped this picture of her. But it didn't stop there. I told you that she had these outlandish outfits. That's what she was known for. Sarah Muir, another close friend and sorority sister, remembers meeting Andrea one night at a theme party. Most of the girls were dressed in really skimpy outfits, but Andrea walked in with this huge outfit, that looks like a dress that you would wear as a Vegas showgirl, like a corset, even with little tassels. It was like she was jumping out of a cake, and the skirt was shaped like the cake. With this picture, I can see why Andrea's friends called her unique and fun. I can't help but hear the song, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," when I see this picture. When Andrea wasn't catching waves on the beach at 3 on her longboard, or going on a hike, or helping a friend with schoolwork or a sorority project, she was doing something else. She loved partying. Sure, she was a typical college girl, but why not? This is the best time, and she liked to go wild and let loose in between working and studying hard. During the summer, she would spend that extra time finding a job. One of those places that she landed a job was as an administrative assistant at a law firm in Brentwood. Another time, she worked at Jamba Juice in the UCLA Student Union. But when she wasn't working, why not live it up with good music, great friends, a little drinking, maybe a lot of drinking? We know how college life can be, but it's one of the best places to do it. You're surrounded by so many people who are willing to go anywhere and do anything with you, like music festivals at the drop of a hat. Andrea definitely didn't miss out on Coachella. I've never been, and I'm sure you've heard of it before, but here she is wearing a cute tie-dye dress at Coachella. Tie-dye was another popular outfit choice for Andrea, along with mismatched socks and anything neon or bright. When Andrea was off at college, her little sister would actually raid her closet. Andrea posted a comment on one of Alexa's Facebook pictures, joking around saying, "Do you ever wear your own clothes anymore?" She hashtagged, "I miss my clothes." It's this picture here. Alexa wrote something back like, "Well, someone has to wear them when you're gone." So I could tell they had a very close relationship. Even when Andrea was away at college, she always made a point to keep in contact with her family. Andrea and her mom talked all the time for hours on end. Andrea would call her not only if she just needed something, but just to check to see how her mom was doing. Leslie would get daily calls from Andrea. She would call her mom from all over. Sometimes it was when she was on campus, from the sculpture garden or the botanical garden, or one of her other favorite spots in California. Her mom got to hear all of the details, how much fun she was having and how much she loved it there. I think you have a feel for Andrea's nature and her helpful spirit. Even when she had studying to do and she had a class the next day that she had to wake up early for, it wouldn't matter. She would still be the first one to stay up late with someone, helping them with their homework. So campus life is what the first year of college is all about. It's the dorm rooms, the tight-knit community. But as you become an upperclassman, things shift. It becomes more about being a little more exclusive, which usually includes moving off campus into senior housing. For example, there are some special apartments close to campus where groups of upper-class students, specifically those in fraternities and sororities, rent out the whole complex. That way, they have their own little world outside of the confines of the school, but still close enough to be involved in all the activities. Many seniors look forward to their last year for this reason, and they plan on where they're going to live a year in advance or more. So, it was 2015. It was senior year, and Andrea had a lot of goals for after she graduated. Of course, she wanted to travel. That was high up on her list. She and Jessica talked about one day getting a place on the beach together, and after that, maybe it would be something like the Peace Corps for Andrea, because that's what her friends imagined she would do. She was fearless, she was always stepping out and challenging herself to do new things. But right now, the most important thing was senior year. For Andrea and her 5 other roommates, her Pi Beta Phi sisters, they decided to move into this apartment complex on Roebling Avenue. It is in high demand. Even today, I saw that there are usually waiting lists. It's a coveted location. It's only 5 minutes away from campus, so you can walk there and back so easily. And it's right in the middle of a bunch of frat houses and sororities off roads like Strathmore Drive or Gailey Avenue. It's definitely the place to be. This building boasts extra-large 2, 3, and 4-bedroom apartments, hardwood floors, washers and dryers in the unit, and parking included in the rent. Also, if you look closely, this apartment complex would be perfect for sorority parties. Look at the huge balconies out front. They face the road where they have frequent block parties. This would also be great for sunbathing, studying, or just enjoying the weather. Andrea shared her apartment with some of her sorority sisters, including close friends Jessica Wessling, who I've mentioned before, Abigail Strauss, Erica Friesen, Samantha Santap-Pau, and Lizzie Matassa. There were other girls from their sorority living in the other units in the same complex, like Sarah Muir, who lived just upstairs. This was a prime location with a beautiful, big courtyard, which was perfect for socializing, especially since all the doors to their apartments were on the inside. So it was easy to see what everyone was doing, to come over to catch up, and that's exactly what I meant by them not locking their doors. There usually wasn't a reason to. Everyone was welcome in each other's apartments, and they knew everyone. Students were also residing in all the surrounding apartment buildings. It was like one big Bruins family. The Bruins is their UCLA mascot, which is like a big grizzly bear. And I almost forgot something. There was another girl living with Andrea and her sisters. Her name was Shea Panda. She's a dog, not a human, but she was the newest addition to Andrea's life. Andrea loved animals. She had a family dog named Chwell back at home in Austin. But now it was time that she had a companion of her own. Shea was a little long-haired Chihuahua Terrier mix. Andrea rescued her from a shelter in January of that year, and Shea Panda gave Andrea a new purpose. She had something to take care of that was her own. And you know how much Andrea loves to give. So her cheeky and goofy side came out when she was introducing her new pet to her sorority sisters. She did it via social media. She made an Instagram called Shea Panda Pup. Shea was the newest member of Pi Beta Phi, introduced as the Pi Beta Phi. Shea's Instagram was pretty funny. It definitely showed off Andrea's sense of humor. She had pictures of her covered in dollar bills, even some provocative poses. I really like the cute ones, like this Valentine's Day picture with a big teddy bear and a box of chocolates. Shea Panda brought so much joy to Andrea's life and to everyone around her. The girls treated her like one of the new sisters to move into their apartment. She had free reign over the whole unit, and Andrea, as social as she was and close with all the girls she lived with, never even shut her bedroom door. It was always open, welcoming her friends in for a chat, to hang out, or to get assistance from her on a project they were working on. She also brought Shea everywhere with her. She kind of reminds me of Elle Woods, with little Bruiser from Legally Blonde. Very fitting for Andrea, with the blonde hair, the bright clothing, and the small dog. I saw that on August 1st of that year. Poor little Shea Panda actually went missing. Andrea was devastated. She posted on Facebook saying, "Shea Panda is on the loose. Please, we need your help to bring this baby home." Thankfully, a few days later, on August 5th, Shea had been found, and Andrea posted an update along with this cute picture of her enjoying some Jamba juice with Shea in her arms. The post read, "Glad tidings, my puppy-loving friends. My tiny pup Shea Panda, who went missing August 1st, has been found. She's a little tired and really hungry, but she's back in my loving arms." By mid-September, Andrea was actually in the process of starting to volunteer at a local animal adoption center. But the only thing on her mind at that very moment was rush week. Senior year meant it was Andrea and her sorority sisters' turn once again to invite the freshmen to explore Pi Beta Phi and all it has to offer. Once the fall came around, it was time for the girls to put everything they needed for rush week together. The first day of the fall semester was Monday, September 21st, and a lot had to get done by the time classes started on the 21st. I had to mention Andrea's post on September 19th. It's one of my favorite music videos. It's Lil Dicky's "Save That Money." I could tell she definitely had a sense of humor when she posted that. Her post also said, "When you're too poor but you still want to hang with your rich homies." It's a classic song and video. If you know, you know. But this would be Andrea's last public Facebook post. She never could have anticipated what was going to happen just one day later. It was Sunday, September 20th, the last weekend before school starts on Thursday, September 24th. The girls decided to hang out on the balconies out in front of their building, drinking, partying, and people watching, as other fraternities and sororities on Roebling Avenue also took part in their own festivities, a big block party. They spent the later part of that afternoon and early evening doing this. And then later, Andrea and her roommates were working on their sorority's recruitment project in their living room. They were making posters, putting together things they would need for setting up their booth in the quad, all the decorations, and more. Andrea was wearing her red Snuggie blanket. She was drinking wine, hanging out, and working on the project. There was a lot to get done, but this was not a school project. It was fun. That was part of what the sorority was all about. That's what's so great about it. It's the social aspect. The girls worked on this project into the early morning hours, and then each one of them started to head to their rooms to get into bed. Jessica and Andrea worked until about 3 a.m., and then they both started to fall asleep on the couch in the living room. Eventually, Jessica got up around 3:30 in the morning and went to sleep in her own room. She's a light sleeper. There were parties all around all the time, so she would have 2 fans going at night to block out the noise from the street. So she fell asleep. The next thing she knew, she was being woken up by someone banging on her bedroom door. Then she heard one of her roommates yelling that their apartment was on fire. So she quickly jumped out of bed and ran out of her bedroom. Once she was out of her door, she saw the fire. Jessica saw her other roommate, Samantha, running toward Andrea's door, which was closed. This seemed odd because she always kept it open to let Shay run free around the apartment. As Samantha opened Andrea's door, Jessica stood right behind her, and they were both screaming, "Andrea!" over and over again. They didn't want to believe that she was inside that room, but as their eyes scanned the entire room that was engulfed in flames at this point, they thought they could make out an outline of their sorority sister lying in her bed, surrounded by that fire. It was a lot to take in. It's not something that you can ever prepare yourself for. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't go inside. The fire was growing, and they needed to get out. They only had seconds to decide what to do, so they ran and evacuated the building. Everyone was standing on the sidewalk. It was 7:10 in the morning, and the fire trucks were already on the scene. Los Angeles City Fire Department Captain Alfred Hernandez and other firefighters had arrived to put out the fire. They worked quickly while students gathered around in shock. The firefighters weaved their fire hose up the steps and into the courtyard and into Andrea's room through a set of French doors on her balcony. Smoke could be seen from all over the neighborhood and beyond. Everyone was on high alert, wondering what was going on. Panic hadn't really set in yet, but of course, texts were going out. They were alerting other sorority sisters and students about the location of the fire, that it was at the senior apartments off Roebling Avenue. One of Andrea's close friends, Jackie, who was a Pi Beta Phi sister as well and the chapter president, heard about the fire that morning. She lived in a different apartment complex and was up early, like everyone else, getting ready for rush week. She was in the bathroom dyeing her hair when she heard the news. One of the girls from across the hall said, "I just heard that there's a fire at the senior apartments." Jackie tried to remain calm, but that's where a number of her friends lived. Her first thought was, of course, you know what? Someone probably left their straightener on. I'm sure they're just going to put it out with a towel. Everything's going to be fine. But that is not what was happening. The scene outside on Roebling Avenue was chaotic. You can tell by these photos, everyone was scared. They were confused, and most of all, they were worried about Andrea because her roommates had gathered around and couldn't help but notice that someone was missing. Andrea was unaccounted for, and it was horrifying for Jessica and Samantha because they knew what they saw. Andrea was inside her bedroom, but they didn't want to believe it. Maybe the firefighters were going to be able to rescue her. They couldn't see what was happening, but the fire was fully consuming Andrea's bedroom, and firefighters could not determine if anyone was inside. The flames were so overpowering, it was bad. It took 32 firefighters to put out this fire, which lasted about 15 minutes, but the fire had been burning much longer than that. And I'm sure you know how rapidly it can cause death and destruction. Now, many students and sorority sisters were getting text messages about Andrea, frantic text messages about her being missing, her not being accounted for, but no authorities were telling them anything yet. However, there were officers and firefighters on the scene trying to gather as much information about this fire. How did it start? Did anyone see or hear anything? They were asking so many questions to other residents in that same building, or anyone that had information. It's common for these things to happen in a college town. A lot of people are on their own for the very first time, and yes, they can leave something on like a stove or another appliance. But it seemed as though this fire started from Andrea's bedroom. So how and why? And why wasn't she moving when her friends were screaming her name? Where was she? Well, after the firefighters were able to extinguish the flames, they began looking around the room. That's when they discovered the lifeless and charred body of a woman lying on the bed near the headboard. Sadly, her body had been fully incinerated. There was nothing they could do to help her. She was no longer capable of being resuscitated. The woman was officially pronounced dead at 8 a.m. Now, I am never trying to be graphic for the sake of hurting anyone or being insensitive, disrespectful, or even for shock factor. I think it's very important to give you the facts, and many times they are horrific. Fires are unforgiving. They destroy everything in their path. When firefighters finally realized someone had still been inside while the fire was raging, they wanted to attempt to identify who she was. Unfortunately, she was categorized as a Jane Doe at the time due to the damage to her face. It was so badly burned that it was unrecognizable, and her fingertips were too badly burned to take fingerprints. I saw these pictures, they're haunting. It's incredible how unrecognizable everything is. Everything is just diminished to ash. While firefighters were calling in the coroner to transport their Jane Doe to the morgue, they heard something. They looked toward the noise and noticed something moving. They took a closer look and realized, oh my God, it's a dog, and it's still alive. Poor Shea Panda. It was her at the foot of Andrea's bed, burned, charred, and barely breathing, clinging to life. She was severely injured and needed immediate medical intervention, so they rushed her to an emergency vet office. Meanwhile, outside, Andrea's roommates were telling police that they thought their friend was still inside the apartment. It doesn't take long for everyone to figure out that one of them didn't make it out alive. The coroner shows up on the scene. That's never good. Selena Barrow, a coroner investigator, was called to recover and remove the victim's body. A sense of fear and shock spread across the college town when the coroners could be seen removing a body from the premises. These pictures were posted in the newspaper, and news stations were already on the scene capturing videos as all of this was unfolding. This made everything real. Those close to Andrea knew she was the only one that wasn't accounted for. Of course, Samantha and Jessica saw her lying on that bed, engulfed in flames. Again, the texts and the calls were going out. This time, Jackie's roommate told her that someone was found dead at the senior apartments and that everyone was accounted for except for Andy. That's when Jackie didn't know what to do. She felt frozen. She had just seen Andrea the night before, albeit only for a few minutes, when she ran in to grab a prop for the recruitment skit. She sat there thinking, if this is true and Andrea's dead, that would have been the last time that I would ever see her. Nobody knew how this could have happened. Did Andrea fall asleep and leave a candle burning? There were so many thoughts going through their minds, and firefighters were assessing the scene, asking the same questions. But something stood out to them. They had seen hundreds of fires, and there are clues to be seen inside, signs to look for. First, they checked outlets like this one from the scene. Were any of them blown out? Was it electrical? No, it wasn't, but something didn't belong. A trash can was lying on the top of the bed. That was strange. It didn't get there on its own. Someone must have placed it there, and not only that, its contents were all burned down to ash. It looked suspicious, as though maybe this is how the fire started. It didn't look like an accident. The victim wouldn't have slept with a burning trash can beside her. The firefighters relayed this information to police, and dispatch sent out arson investigators. They arrived on the scene 2 hours after the fire was reported. They took pictures of everything. They wanted everything to appear the way it was before they began their investigation. I have some of these photos, and I'm going to warn you, they're really bad. Let's start with this one. Here are investigators putting the doors back on to envision what they looked like before the blaze. You can see the screen is still in one of them, but both of the frames are charred. They were double French doors from outside the balcony. Now let's move to the inside. Here's the vantage point looking outside from in the room. It looks like a very messy room. But something you have to remember is that firefighters use very high-pressure hoses. Anything in the room that's not bolted down or heavy can be displaced by the power of the water. It's coming in at such a high speed, so all this debris wasn't necessarily in these places before the fire started. If you look closely, you can see a metal shelving unit here. This could have had boxes on it with clothing inside. It could have been very organized. You can still see some folded items still intact on the shelves right here. But see all this? Well, as the fire burned, it destroyed everything, and it just fell to the ground in ashes. These could have been outfits on hangers in the section of the metal organizer. It's the section without shelves. So it appears to have maybe had long hanging garments. Maybe these were all of Andy's costumes. They could have been hung here, but now they're just a pile of debris. Same with the comforter that is now lying between the bed frame and the metal shelving unit. Just because it's there doesn't mean it was there before. Firefighters used the hose to put out the flames. The water could have picked it up and ripped it off the bed. Anything light could be thrown around the room. We don't know for sure where these items were, but I can see a dresser here. Then there's a pair of shoes still lying next to one another, a Trader Joe's bag on the floor, pillows and bedding. Now, looking at the bed, you can see how the fire burned the mattress down to the springs. A rug is hanging from the outside balcony. Let's look at the room from a different angle. I examined these pictures for probably a good hour just trying to understand the layout of the room. This right here is the side of that dresser I just showed you earlier, and these appear to be a set of drawers. Here are those metal shelves that we already saw. You can now see boxes of what looks like clothing, and some items are still intact. There's another small dresser here. Maybe this could have been like a side table, or maybe it sat inside the metal organizer. Now it's between the bed and the organizer. Now let me show you the bed. You can see the mattress and the springs coming through it. This area right here was circled. I'd say this could be where little Shea Panda was found. The circle was already on the evidence photos, and the only other item in the circle is a cup. When reading documents, they indicated that Shea was found at the foot of the bed. This area is less burned than the other places, so I assumed that this was most likely where the doggy was found. You can see all this debris on the bed, and now to the headboard area. As you can see, this right here is that metal trash can that was observed on the bed, and inside there are burned items of trash. It seemed to investigators that the fire actually originated on the bed, and this led them to believe that someone started the inferno by dumping the contents of this trash can onto the bed and lighting it on fire. Then, the fire moved upward to the ceiling and down the walls, making its way across the whole room. This fire was no accident. Once it was determined to be arson, which is intentional, the investigation was more intense. There was something else amiss. All the blood. There was a lot of it, especially right next to the bed on the floor, and even dripping off of the bed frame. It didn't add up. The blood on the hardwoods was smeared, and there was a great deal of it at this point in particular right next to the bed. Now, I know that they stated that Andrea was near the headboard, but at some point she was hanging off this bed. I know because of a picture I saw from the scene. Towards the headboard, there is a lot of blood on top of that charred bed sheet and trash. There's also blood on the headboard of the bed, which leads me to believe that this is the area of the bed where Samantha and Jessica had witnessed their friend curled up and unresponsive. The way the blood is dripping downward on the side also makes sense if this is where she was laying, bleeding. But why was she bleeding this much? The smeared blood could indicate signs of a struggle. Whatever happened here was done on purpose, and it was beginning to look as though the woman labeled as Jane Doe had been the target of a brutal homicide. While all of this is going on in Los Angeles, Andrea's mom and dad back in Austin, Texas, are getting up and starting their day as usual. Her sister Alexis is at school and she's in math class. Alexis sees her phone ringing, and it's one of Andrea's friends, so she picks up. Never could she have ever expected to hear the words, "Do you know?" Well, she does now, and soon Leslie is made aware of what is being said. She immediately reaches out to the friend that called Alexis, and she said, "What is going on?" She explained to Leslie that there had been a fire in their apartment, and everyone made it out except for Andy. Leslie sat there shocked. She didn't know what to believe. She didn't want to believe this was true. Maybe they just didn't know where she was. Maybe she was at a friend's house, because she couldn't be dead. Andrea's father contacted the LAPD, and they told him that they couldn't release any information until they got to Los Angeles. Of course, the family immediately booked their flights. They prayed that entire trip, just saying, "Please let her be alive." Leslie could not believe this was happening. It was her worst nightmare, and now that premonition made a lot more sense. By 10:30 a.m., Andrea's roommates and other students from the apartment complex were all down at the LAPD being interviewed separately, one after the other. The detectives wanted to put together a time frame of the events that happened before the fire started. There was a lot to gain in these interviews. I'm going to break down all of that information and give you the timeline. All of the girls gave the same account regarding spending time on the balcony out front in their apartment complex, and that was in the early evening, and then working on the recruitment project in the living room, having wine, hanging out together. A roommate you haven't heard much about is Abigail. She got home from work around 10:20 p.m. on Sunday night. The girls were working on the project. She joined in for a little while, and then she made it to bed around 1:30 in the morning. I already told you that Jessica was up the longest with Andrea until she went to bed in her own room around 3:30 a.m. However, there was someone in that apartment that saw Andrea after this. Remember how I mentioned Samantha had a job on campus and that she had to clock in before 6 a.m.? Well, she was allowed to work from home as long as she went in and clocked in, so she left the apartment at approximately 5:50 in the morning. When she was leaving, she actually saw Andrea still asleep on the living room couch. However, when she returned less than an hour later at 6:30 a.m., Andrea was no longer on the couch, and she noticed her bedroom door was closed. In that moment, she recalled thinking, "That's unusual. That wasn't normally how Andrea slept." The biggest lead the police got was when they spoke to Sarah during this time frame that I just laid out. Sarah had been driving her boyfriend to the airport. She came back home around 5:35 a.m. Her apartment is directly above Andrea's room. It was still dark when she arrived. Sarah made her way up the front stairway and into the inner corridor of the adjoining buildings, where her front door was and where the front doors to the apartments are accessed from. From the pictures that I could find, it appears as though the apartments on top have a stairwell that leads to their front doors on the second floor, and the first floor apartments are accessed through doors like these on the bottom floor. So Sarah made her way to her front door in the courtyard, and she was about to turn her key when she heard something that made her turn around. That's when she saw a man at the bottom of the stairwell in the courtyard. As she was turning to face him, he ran away toward the front of the building in the direction of Roebling Avenue. This made her uneasy. She didn't recognize him, and it was in the middle of the night, and it scared her. So she took note of what he was wearing: a black baseball cap, a black and white tank top, and dark-colored jeans. Even with this encounter being as brief as it was, it left Sarah feeling really frightened. So, when she was inside her apartment, she deadbolted the door, and then she texted her boyfriend to let him know what had happened. She told him what she saw, that there had been a man at the bottom of her stairs, and she wasn't sure if she should call the campus police or not. But after speaking on the phone with her boyfriend, she felt a little better. I can understand why. It's tough both ways. On one hand, it could be someone's friend. It could be someone's boyfriend. I mean, it is a college town. New people are coming in and out all the time, so you don't want to jump to conclusions. But on the other hand, sometimes you just have a gut feeling. Maybe it's the way that they're leaving, like running away, that just gives you a bad feeling. There are plenty of walks of shame at this hour of the night when someone's been hooking up with someone, so sometimes you just really can't be sure. But either way, Sarah still felt uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Seeing that stranger in the private part of their complex just didn't sit right with her. She didn't have much longer to sleep, but she did set her alarm, and she tried to get some rest. But just 45 minutes later, around 6:15, she was jolted awake by the sound of a woman screaming and a dog barking loudly. It sounded like it was coming from down below her apartment, and she knew that Andrea had a dog, so she wondered, could it be her? But the thing is, Panda never barked. She had never once heard her, not one time. She hadn't heard anything like this before, so she wasn't sure. The dog was going crazy. There was a shrill bark, then whimpering, and then non-stop barking. So first, Sarah decided to check in with Andrea. She called her phone a couple of times, but she didn't get an answer. But because of what she saw earlier, she decided to call 911. She told the operator that just a couple of minutes ago she heard someone screaming in her complex. The operator was like, "Okay, what's the address?" Sarah told her, "It's 1954 Roebling. Just a couple of minutes ago, I heard someone screaming in my complex." "She's still screaming. Can you hear that?" In the actual 911 call, you can hear a scream. I'm gonna play it again. "She's still screaming." That is chilling. After that, Sarah said she is still screaming, and the operator told her that they're going to send officers to check to see what's going on. I know I keep saying this, but it's a college town. It's not uncommon. Police get calls like this all the time, and it turns out to be some drunk girl just having a good time or something similar. What's really sad is it reminds me so much of the way the cops used to come to the King Road house in Idaho all those times before those 4 students were stabbed to death inside their off-campus house. Some cops have just heard it all. They don't take these calls seriously. Sarah told the operator that she knows the girl below her has a dog. The operator let Sarah know that they're on their way. "Can you hear the sirens?" Sarah's waiting outside on the balcony, freaking out. When she looks down below, she notices that the window pane of Andrea's bedroom was open. She finally let the operator know that yes, she can hear them. They're getting closer now. Then Sarah said, "Okay, they're here." The officers arrived at 6:23 a.m. There were 4 of them, 2 veteran officers, Rodell Suddeth and Alicia Williams, and their 2 rookie cops, Thomas Monteague and Eric Tillett. They were still in training. Sarah was about to speak with police. At this point, she lets them know that she heard screaming and a dog barking, and earlier, she saw a man on the stairwell running away toward the road. But by the time the police had gotten there, the screams and the barking had already stopped. Sarah told them where Andrea's unit was and how to access it if need be, since she thought it sounded like the screams and the barking were coming from there. That is where she directed them to go. The 4 officers made their way to the courtyard, and they began using flashlights to look inside the windows of the 8-unit complex. They were also looking for signs of forced entry in any of the doors, and they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. They flashed their light into the living room of Andrea's apartment and even into her downstairs unit. It had a balcony that led out to the courtyard. They could see her empty bed inside, but they didn't see anything that raised any concerns. The balcony window panes appeared to be closed, the front door was closed, and everything appeared to be normal. So after just 6 minutes, the officers left without even telling Sarah what happened. Having them come out there seemed like a waste to her. It didn't make her feel any better at all. At 6:30 in the morning, the officers made a report that they cleared the scene and there was no evidence of a crime. Sarah was still out on her balcony. She was looking for the police, feeling really confused and nervous. She didn't feel like anything had been resolved. It was like they never got to the bottom of where the screaming was coming from, and Sarah felt uneasy. So she decided to try calling and texting Andrea, but her calls were going directly to voicemail, and she received no response. At this point, it was around 6:45 in the morning. Sarah tried to get in touch with some of the other girls that lived below her, but no one answered their phones. At this point, it was around 6:45, and like I said, she goes out to the balcony again and even calls out to Andrea, just yelling, "Andy," to see if maybe she was down there and would respond. But she got no response. She went back inside and saw her roommate, Erica, was up and in the kitchen getting a glass of water. She tells her everything about the man, the screams, calling 911, how the police came out but never told her what happened, and she just felt bad about everything. Erica tried to make Sarah feel better. She told her, "You know what? Don't worry, the officers probably came and did their job, and everything's probably totally fine." Except it wasn't. Just a few minutes later, as Erica was walking back into her room, Sarah was startled by a loud bang that was coming from right below the unit, and it sounded like Andrea's French doors slamming open. She ran to her bedroom balcony. She looked outside, and the first thing she notices is all the smoke. Then she sees a guy coming out of Andrea's room and jumping over her balcony. She couldn't believe it. It was the same man that she saw earlier, and this time he had a red blanket draped over his shoulders like a cape, and he was running out into the courtyard. Sarah, full of adrenaline, screamed to him, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" She started calling 911 and literally chased after this man. At the same time, Samantha, who was in the unit below, which she shared with Jessica, Andrea, and Abby, was woken up by the fire alarm. She ran out to the living room and heard a female voice from above loudly yelling, "Where are you going?" Or "What are you doing?" She was catching that interaction between Sarah and the man who was escaping from Amanda's room. This was when Samantha realized that there was a fire in their apartment, and she started to wake up the other girls. She banged on Jessica's door, waking her up, and then they both ran to Andrea's room. Samantha was the one who opened Andrea's door, with Jessica looking inside behind her. They saw Andrea lying on the bed as the room was engulfed in flames. Samantha told the police that she noticed blood on Andrea's neck, shoulder, and chest. Both Jessica and Samantha repeatedly called out to Andrea, just screaming, "Andy! Andy!" again and again, but she didn't move. That was when they had to evacuate before the fire got even more intense. Abby recalled being woken up around 6 o'clock to the sound of loud voices and a dog barking. She waited a few minutes, then fell back to sleep. By 7 o'clock, she also heard fire alarms going off, and she ran out of the apartment. As she did, she passed Andrea's room and saw a large fire inside. All of the roommates left the apartment together and called 911 to report the fire. Meanwhile, Sarah had chased this guy, and when he made it to Roebling Avenue, she couldn't see him. But what she did see was a red car pulling out of one of the carports and driving away. She tried to take in every detail of this car so she could relay it to the operator. She made a second 911 call around 7 a.m., frantically explaining that she had just called about a girl screaming and now saw a guy running out of her friend's room and that it was on fire. At this point, the fire alarms in the building were starting to go off, and Andrea's roommates were beginning to wake up. Sarah was still on the phone with 911, and they were asking her the same questions for a second time. She was frustrated, telling them, "I already went through this." But again, she gave the same description, a young man wearing jeans, a tank top, and a baseball cap. Now there was a red blanket wrapped around him, and she believed he got into a red Nissan car. She also relayed a very important piece of information about the car. Since she was part of the authority, she was familiar with Greek letters and knew which letters signified different fraternities. She recalled seeing a sticker on the back of that car in the back window as the car was driving away. She told the police it was Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity that was what the sticker was. By 7:10 a.m., the fire department was there, starting to put out the flames. You are now all caught up. There are so many moving parts and different people involved in what was transpiring, along with different accounts of the night before and the early morning leading up to that fire that took their friend's life. At least they believe Andy is dead, but the coroner has still not made an official statement regarding the victim's identity. All of Andrea's roommates were asked if they knew anyone who would want to hurt Andrea, and they all said no. She had no enemies. Everyone loved Andy. She didn't have a boyfriend, so they really had no idea. The closest they could come was that maybe she had a Tinder date and something went terribly wrong. But even that sounded far-fetched. They had no idea why anyone would want to hurt Andrea on purpose. It just didn't make any sense. They were still all in shock and still hadn't accepted that this was really happening. They just kept replaying that part in their heads when they were desperately trying to think of a way to put out the fire and rescue their friend, only to see her being rolled out by the coroner just a few minutes later. And this whole situation is very traumatic, not only for the girls who lived with Andrea, but for other people in the complex and beyond. It affected everyone in the UCLA community and across Los Angeles as the news spread. Sarah also let detectives know that she saw one of the officers on scene when the fire was being extinguished. She was standing there crying with her friends, and she told them, "I'm the one that called the police." He let her know he was one of the officers that responded to that first 911 call. She asked him point blank, "Did you knock on the door to Andrea's apartment?" He said that they didn't. Sarah was shocked. Another key fact that the roommates added was that Andrea's French doors that led into her bedroom were broken and did not shut entirely. Another thing I gathered that wasn't actually mentioned but was on Reddit was that at every quarter, there's a huge block party on Roebling Avenue near these apartments. Hundreds of students gather out there on the street, people are drinking, starting bonfires in the streets, and basically just partying it up, going wild. 50 to 60 cops usually have to come out there and shut it down. There have been actual fires set on the street. That's almost verbatim from what I read. So it makes sense that at first, some of the students who heard about a fire being somewhere on Roebling Avenue were probably like, "Oh God, not again." One person on Reddit, who lived in this area for their job at the time, not because they were a student, said that they ended up moving out of this neighborhood and quitting their job because of these parties. They knew several people who did the same, but they were too afraid to complain about it because they were scared that someone would vandalize their places, as a lot of vandalism had gone on, basically in retaliation from students who were angry that someone called the university police during their ragers. This poster on Reddit said that their property was damaged and they had to pay to get it fixed. They personally had to clean up all the garbage that was out on the street in front of their place. So, apparently, this was something that brought a lot of chaos to this area all the time. I did happen to see what looked like a bunch of random trash on the side of the road in this picture when the firefighters first got on the scene. These are important aspects of this case because these parties bring in a bunch of people, many who don't live here or even go to school at UCLA, so they may have to broaden their net to look for suspects. Police also spoke to other people who lived in the complex. A man named Scott Ha, who was a third-year civil engineering student, recalled being woken up by the sounds of fire alarms going off. He said that everyone was screaming and the fire just kept getting bigger and bigger. He heard people screaming Andy's name, but no one could go inside and get her because the fire was getting too big. He also said he saw Andrea the night before and said she was a very outgoing and fun person. After gathering all this information, the police canvassed the neighborhood around Andrea's complex, looking for a red Nissan with the Greek letters and interviewing guys from the local chapter of Lambda Chi Alpha. But no one could recall any of their members having a car that matched that description at all. They didn't have too much to go on, and everyone in this community was on edge. Social media was going crazy. Condolences, shock, and memories were being shared. It was a lot to take in, and there were, of course, also theories about what happened. First, everyone heard there was a fire, and it was shocking enough, but to find out that a fellow student was found dead in a set fire was even more alarming. Yet still, there are unfortunate situations like this that do occur, many situations that make sense, and people were trying to figure out how this could have happened. There are many ways. I mentioned a few: a candle being left burning, maybe a cigarette that was lit, or a joint that fell on the floor, and then the room caught fire. There are just so many assumptions about what had happened, and at this point, no one had officially reported who had died. It wasn't until a couple of days later that the news would get out that this was actually a homicide investigation and not an accidental fire. That changed everything. But for now, I want to jump back to what was going on outside Andrea's apartment. A lot was happening. Curious onlookers, media, and police blocking off this area to preserve evidence and ensure the safety of the community. They had officers on scene around the clock, looking out for anything suspicious. It was around 9 p.m. when two guys, Nicholas and Mahir, approached the officers and told them they wanted to report a crime that had occurred in their apartment, which was right across the street from Andrea's. Of course, this piqued detectives' interest. The guys explained that both of them, along with one other guy, Diego, were UCLA students who lived in a building across the street referred to as Red Roebling at 10943 Roebling Avenue, apartment number 2. While I'd probably call it a shade of orange, here's what it looks like. You can see from the bird's eye view how close their building is in proximity to Andrea's. They explained that they had thrown a party the night before, on Sunday and that they woke up to find some of their belongings were missing. Mahir's laptop was gone, and he remembered putting his computer in the living room on the futon or the coffee table the night before. Then, Nicholas realized his car keys were missing. He knew he left his car keys on the living room desk. So he checked his car and noticed it was unlocked, and it looked like someone had gone through his glove compartment. They also noticed that a set of Bluetooth Sonos speakers that belonged to Mahir were also missing from their living room. They made a burglary report and provided this information to the homicide detectives. At this point, LA County Deputy District Attorney Victor Avila was appointed to the case. It was believed that the person involved in this burglary most likely had something to do with what happened at Andrea's. At least, they had to investigate to either connect the dots or rule it out as being related. Mahir explained that the Sonos speakers had to be connected to an email address registered online to work, and he provided the current IP address that the speakers were connected to. One of the investigators decided to contact Sonos and let them know what was going on, telling Sonos to please notify them immediately if there was any attempt to register these stolen speakers. Now, I want to tell you what's happening with Andrea's family. They arrived at LAX at midnight, or around 1 a.m. more. Now we're going into day 2, which was September 22nd, and I want to stop here. I said to myself, wow, just think about this for a minute. What if you had been on that plane with them? We're all in our own worlds, especially when we're traveling. We all have our own agendas, our own deadlines, and places to be. I've seen people lose their cool. I know I've been guilty of being impatient. I've traveled enough to witness people being really rude to one another. People being rude to passengers. Think about Andrea's family next time, because you never truly know what someone's going through. It's so sad for me to think that they were flying in to find out about their deceased daughter. Imagine if some stranger had gone off on them because of their own trivial problem that they're having while these people's lives are falling apart. It's just something that I thought about. Finally, they all get to the station, and officers let them know that a crime has occurred and that their loved one was involved. They already know that Andrea is dead, but Leslie doesn't want to accept it. She wants to see her daughter. She wants to hold her for one last time, and she wouldn't believe she was dead unless she saw it for herself. However, at this point, the victim was still unidentified, and the police explained that this is a homicide investigation, so they're not allowed to have access to the body until the autopsy has been completed. Can you even imagine? I bet they said it matter-of-factly. First it's a fire, then it's your daughter who didn't make it out alive, and now it's she's been murdered. Leslie and her husband were not aware that Andrea had been murdered. They just thought she was unable to escape the fire. However, one of Andrea's roommates actually told them that they saw Andrea curled up on the bed when they were trying to evacuate the building, and they told them how they tried to call out to her again and again, over and over, but she just was lying there with blood on her shoulders and her neck. Leslie knew at that moment that this was more than a fire. The homicide detectives that were working on Andrea's case persuaded Leslie not to insist on seeing Andrea's body at the morgue. It would be a mistake because, according to them, it would be an image that you can never erase from your mind. Seeing her deceased is bad enough, but before they have a chance to clean her body, it would be a lot to take in. At this point, the police asked for dental records in order to confirm Andrea's identity. They were going to be working on the autopsy the very next day, so those records were eventually provided. Andrea's loved ones headed to their hotel so they could wait on updates. And on their way there, one of Andrea's friends texted them and said, "Andrea's dog is alive, but she's in critical condition at the local emergency animal hospital." They got the address and rushed over to be by Shay's side. Leslie and Alexis walked in, and they've got Shay in one of these glass cabinets. I know exactly what they look like. It delivers oxygen to the enclosure so that the animal can receive it without anything being put in their nose or on their body. Shay's in really bad shape. The doctor comes over, introduces themselves, and explains Shay's condition. It's not good news. Shay is in pain, and she's suffering, and it doesn't look like she's going to make it. It's terrible news. They had to make a decision. Either let her die on her own, which would be very painful, or let her go be with Andrea sooner by putting her to sleep. That was a very hard decision, but they knew what they needed to do. It wouldn't be fair to make little Shay suffer any longer. They knew she should go and be with her mama. So they took Shay out of that crate, put her in Alexis's arms, and the doctor gave her the injection to peacefully let her slip away. They all said their last goodbyes and told little Shay to kiss Andrea for them. I had to listen to the way Leslie described it in an interview. That poor dog, and what she had to witness. Who would do something like this? The dog had to witness someone evil doing this to Andrea. Shay was there until the very end, trying to protect her owner, staying by her side, and barking until she couldn't hold on any longer. This was also the moment when Leslie realized something terrifying. As she was sitting there, looking at Shay's condition and how badly she was burned and charred, that's when reality hit her. If her daughter was in the same fire and didn't make it out, then this is what her body must have looked like, or worse. It was a sad realization, one that no mother should ever have to imagine. When they met with the district attorney, he promised the family that he would find the person who did this to Andrea and keep them off the streets so that they could never hurt another person again. They were about to get their first lead, but first, let me tell you what they discovered when the autopsy was conducted on September 22nd, the day after Andrea had been found. It's going to be a lot to hear. Dr. Matthew Miller, a deputy medical examiner, performed the autopsy on Andrea's body. He was able to positively identify her from her dental records, but when she was first brought into the medical examiner's office, she was wearing a sports bra and had nothing else on. No pants, no underwear, nothing. That was definitely something they made a note of. Her face and her head were extremely burned and charred. Most of her hair was burned off, but they did notice blood in the hair that was still remaining on the back of her head. Her face was burned beyond the ability to be recognized. Most of her body, about 90%, had been burned. The only skin that was still intact was some on the front and back of her neck, a portion of her chest, as well as her lower back and part of her abdomen. There was also some skin remaining on her left arm, on the backside, and on the front of her left shoulder, but her legs were entirely charred. I also saw the autopsy photos, and by the time she was cleaned up, her skin had a marbleized look to it. There were several varying colors: purple, red, and beige. It was really sad, and the muscles were all exposed all over where the fire had burned through her delicate flesh. Once Andrea's body was cleaned up, it was very obvious that she had been stabbed by a sharp object. She had multiple stab wounds. Now I'm going to tell you the places they found them. There were 5 of them close together on the right side of her neck, all in different directions. The 6th and 7th were on the other side, close together. Then, moving down, the 8th and 9th were near her breast and underneath her left side on her underarm. The 10th and 11th were in the middle of her chest and on one of her breasts. A 12th was found on her left forearm near the inner elbow, and the 13th and 14th, and yes, I am still not done, were in her stomach near her navel, with the 15th in her pelvic area. The 16th and 17th were on her lower back, and the final 2, numbers 18 and 19, were both close together under her chin. It was very brutal. I saw the wounds on her lower back in photos. The wounds on her lower back were almost round in nature. They weren't the type that I usually see that are typical of what a knife would make. However, the fire and what it did to her body could have changed the shape, because the ones to her neck were about 1/4 of an inch long, and they matched what you can imagine a knife would make. They were also 3 inches deep. These made contact with her thyroid gland and perforated the carotid artery. This would have been a rapidly fatal injury. The medical examiner stated that someone with this injury would have died within minutes because those arteries are the ones that bring oxygen and blood to the brain. Andrea's cause of death was multiple stab wounds. There were 2 separate wounds that could have been fatal individually: the stab wound that was 3 inches deep to her right carotid artery, and a stab wound to the left side of her neck, which perforated the left carotid artery. This seems to be a personal crime. This is a type of murder where you have to be very close to the victim, and the sheer number of wounds goes well beyond what is needed to render someone unable to survive. It's overkill. The autopsy also showed that there were low levels of carbon monoxide in Andrea's blood, and there was no soot in her lungs. This meant that she was most likely deceased or close to death when the fire was started. Her death was not a result of the fire itself, and instead, the investigators believe that the fire was started in order to conceal evidence of her murder. Andrea was also found without clothes on below the waist, so swabs were requested to test for male DNA. Criminalist Jessica Gadway collected those samples from Andrea's body. However, it was significantly charred, so that stopped them from doing a full exam. But swabs were taken from the vagina, her anus, and her mouth. The samples were tested for the presence of sperm and male DNA. There were no positive results for either. However, the vaginal sample for male DNA was inconclusive, not negative, for the presence of male DNA, and this was because of how bad Andrea's body was. It was the condition that made it hard for them to test. The next day was Wednesday, September 23rd. Just a couple of days had passed since Andrea was found murdered in her bedroom. The authorities had not revealed her identity yet, but that didn't stop newspapers from running stories with the victim's name as Andrea Andy Delvesco. That was the last thing that her friends wanted to see. It was in black and white. Initially, the local UCLA newspaper, the Daily Bruin, reported that a student had died in a Westwood fire, and they showcased this picture from outside, with the fire trucks in the middle of the street and the arson investigators on scene. They also posted that the police were interested in speaking with anyone who might have information that would lead to an arrest. This article was later updated to clear up reports that the victim's boyfriend was a person of interest. We know the truth. She didn't have a boyfriend. No one even knew who she was yet, and all of this was coming out. UCLA officials stated that they didn't have a suspect at the time. In other news outlets like the Los Angeles Times, they were reporting Andrea's name by the 23rd, just a day before classes were supposed to begin. They ran this article with the headline, "Body Found in Fire Identified," even though Andrea had not officially been identified yet. It was members of her sorority that spoke out. They told him that it was Andrea who had been killed. Jackie Mados was a chapter president, and she was interviewed. She said that Andy had a contagious spirit, and she was a fearless giver. She was a friend to every person she met, and she was always inclusive and there for everyone. She said, "More than anything, Andy wanted us to be ourselves, and most of all, to never give up." The article went on to say that even though the sorority released Andrea's name, the LA County coroner's officials had not reported her identity, but that the death was ruled a homicide. The school chancellor, Gene Block, also made a statement saying that UCLA was a close-knit community, that this was tragic and it affected all of them, and that they were going to provide grief counselors on campus. The article also showed this picture of investigators walking up the stairs to Andrea's building. Everyone in the community was on edge. It felt different being on campus because there was a killer out there. Students were expected to go to class the next day. Sarah couldn't go back to normal like that. She had heard Andrea's screams. She was having a really hard time. It was haunting. She couldn't sleep. She was having nightmares. I can only imagine how terrifying it would be to lose someone that you love. You'd be replaying it over and over again in your head. And Sarah, knowing that she tried to help, that she knew something wasn't right, and her friend ended up dead anyway. Sarah had also been displaced from her apartment, along with all of the other residents. They had all been evacuated and relocated temporarily until they were able to repair the building, and of course, until the investigation was completed. Getting back to normal was going to take a long time. The same day that this article went out, a representative from Sonos reached back out to investigators. They said that someone had tried to register the speakers with a new email address, and they gave investigators the new IP address that was now connected to the stolen set of speakers, as well as the name of the person who registered them, a guy named Joseph, and the address where the speakers were currently connected to was out in Fresno, California, which was over 3 hours away from where the speakers had been taken. So the police wasted no time at all. They took that long drive out there, and around 11:30 a.m., they walked right up to that house, knocked on the door, and asked for Joseph. The guy that answered was like, "I'm Joseph," but he said there's two Josephs here. "I'm Joseph Marcaria, and there's also a Joseph Garcia," and he looked really nervous. The investigators want to know right now, do you own a set of Sonos speakers? Did you try to register them online? Joseph explains that they're not his, he's borrowing them. Well, they already know that they're not his. But what he meant was that he got them from his roommate, who brought them home over the weekend. He said his roommate, Albert, went out to LA on Friday, September 18th, to stay with a friend and attend the Chris Brown concert that night at the Honda Center in Anaheim. When he returned to Fresno days later, on the morning of Tuesday, September 22nd, he placed a bunch of items in their garage, including the Sonos speakers, some silverware, dishes, towels, and liquor bottles. Joseph says to the police, "When I saw the items, I asked Albert where they came from, and he told me that one of his friends from LA was moving and he let him have the items." Now there's another name thrown into the mix. These items seem to have changed hands a number of times, so investigators don't know what to think. Who stole them? Was it Joseph? Was it the other Joseph? Was it his roommate? Or had someone in LA stolen them and somehow this guy, Albert, got a hold of them? They get Albert's full name from his roommate. It's Alberto Medina. They do a background check on him. They find out he's a 22-year-old Fresno State University student. He's currently studying social work and psychology, and he doesn't have a criminal background. They needed a lot more information, but at least Alberto's roommate told investigators where they could find him. The next day, Thursday, September 24th, Jackie, the Pi Beta Phi chapter president, sent out an email in regard to the recruitment process. Jackie said it would continue in honor of Andrea, saying, "I can understand why some may find it hard to understand this choice. However, preparing for recruitment has allowed us an outlet to remember Andy, to refocus on our sisterhood, and help us begin the healing process." She also asked the community to remember Andrea as her good friend. She said, "Losing a friend is hard, no matter the circumstances. We know Andy would have wanted her Pi Phi sisters to move forward and celebrate the friendship we share." At this point, many condolences were being posted on Andrea's Facebook page, her Instagram, and all over social media. Everyone felt so bad for her and what had happened. However, just one day later, the narrative changed, and just as quickly as people were there to be compassionate for Andrea's loss, they were quick to start judging her, even blaming her for her own murder. Yes, it's true, and that's because news outlets were running with a new story, one that painted Andrea as a blonde sorority party girl drug dealer. Yes, there was one headline I read that said, "Drug-dealing sorority girl found murdered." It was bad, but was it true? Was Andrea a drug dealer? We know we shouldn't believe everything we read, but it was hard not to when these reporters had receipts, not from purchasing drugs from her, of course, but they had receipts in the form of court documents. I found them online, and I read them for myself. But before anyone had a chance to dig into them, it was the headlines that caught their attention. It seems whenever drugs are mentioned as being involved in otherwise heartbreaking and heinous crimes, it gets reduced to, "Oh, another drug deal gone wrong," or worse. I saw some people posting things like, "Good, a drug dealer off the streets." Wow, the LA Times seems to be the outlet that ran the story first. Their article said, "UCLA fire victim faced drug charges." It went on to read, "The student found dead in a burning apartment was to appear in court on Friday." So just 5 days after she was found, the Times said that Andrea had been charged with multiple felony counts of drug possession. They specifically listed the drugs as club or party drugs and said that, according to court records, the list of charges included meth. Well, that's all that anyone needed to hear to label Andrea a drug dealer, drug addict, or drug user. The way the word drug was associated with Andrea didn't matter. The whole thing cast a negative light on this poor girl who was brutally killed. Someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. All of a sudden, these keyboard warriors, who I guess have never made any bad choices in life, just went to town typing away, posting the most heartless things about Andrea and what they thought happened to her. In the midst of her loved ones having to deal with the reality that they would never see Andrea alive again, They had to see all this garbage being said about her, assumptions made by people that didn't even know Andrea. Because if they had, they would know that wasn't who she was. She wasn't some reckless drug dealer who was killed to keep quiet because she was about to go to court. But that was the story that was being thrown around. The article stated that court documents they obtained showed that Andrea was arrested by UCLA campus police on June 4th. There were no details provided about why the police suspected that she was selling drugs, but when they searched her, they found her in possession of the following. According to the charges against her in the felony complaint filed on July 8th by the Superior Court of the State of California, the Times reported that Andrea was charged with possession with the intent to sell MDMA, LSD, and hallucinogenic mushrooms, as well as meth. They went on to add that all of these are considered party drugs, often used at raves and other all-night dances. The article said that Andrea was out on bail at the time of the murder, and she was awaiting her September court date. That bail was set at $120,000. So here people are assuming that Andrea's parents bailed out their little girl, or that she had the money because she was this huge drug dealer. Andrea had actually been released on her own recognizance. See this right here, the OR, in the dollar amount section. This portion of the complaint says, "I ordered that the defendant be held to answer, therefore, and be admitted to bail in the sum of the OR." This means own recognizance. It's not a dollar amount. Andrea didn't pay. Actually, this judge trusted that Andrea would appear for a court date, so she was allowed to leave without posting bail. I'm quoting the NOLA.com website now when I say that, simply put, OR release is no-cost bail. Defendants released on their own recognizance need only a written promise to appear in court. No bail has to be paid. This means she had to appear in court, or else there would be more conditions placed on her, or even more charges. So I guess technically the LA Times wasn't wrong by saying she was out on bail, but she didn't pay anything. Contrary to people thinking that she's this terrible, dangerous, untrustworthy drug dealer, the judge, at their discretion, and probably because of things they look at, like a person's past criminal record or history, assessed the risk that Andrea posed to the public, and it was low, so she was free to go. But none of that was ever mentioned in this article. So as you can probably imagine, it was hard for Andrea's friends and family to read the headlines. I saw them. They were brutal. They were so judgmental. This is college? Like, really? I almost think it's expected that most students are going to experiment with drugs, whether you think it's okay or not. A person doesn't deserve to die because of it. More and more of these articles were popping up with headlines pegging Andrea as having a secret life, even stating that her parents had chosen to ignore their daughter's double life and praise her for her boundless spirit. That was NBCLA that made that lovely statement. A drug dealer was a stretch according to those close to Andrea, but of course, the rumors were spreading. Again, I have to remind you to be sensitive. I'm definitely not condoning drug dealers. But there are times when people go get party favors for other people in their friend group. We don't know the details. All I found were the court documents that don't humanize Andrea at all. Even her defense attorney handling the drug case, Jeremy Lesson, spoke out, saying that Andrea was a very bright young woman, and he thought that she had a very promising future. He was shocked when he heard that she had been killed. Her friends and family know her best, and they said Andrea was not a drug dealer. I did see her mom defending her, saying it wasn't even a large amount of drugs on her, and that she was just getting them to sell to her close group of friends. Her friend Jackie said it wasn't meth, it was Adderall, and that you pretty much couldn't find one student that wasn't taking it at one point or another while they were at UCLA. I'm glad that they were sticking up for her. However, to be fair, when I checked the complaint, it did list methamphetamine. I wanted to see if meth and Adderall were somehow interchangeable, maybe even in the legal sense. Well, methamphetamine and Adderall are both stimulant drugs, so they're both similar in that aspect, yes, sure. They both have the potential to be abused because they can both be addictive, but they're not the same drug. However, what I found interesting is what I read on the Delhi Health Group site when comparing the substances on a molecular or chemical level. Methamphetamine and Adderall are very closely related. The differences between these two substances are quite minor. They are both classified under the same controlled substance classification, Schedule II, and both require a prescription if they're in the form of pills. However, usually the type of meth that drug dealers are selling is not prescriptions that are manufactured in a laboratory. They're made privately, obviously not by professionals, and they look very different from pills. The site does say that Adderall falls under the class of drugs known as amphetamines, and on a chemical level, Adderall and meth are close to identical to the naked eye. Wow, I didn't know any of this, and I think a lot of people don't know how closely related they really are. Methamphetamine, however, has an added chemical component called methyl, which is where it gets its name. Methyl consists of a single carbon atom as well as 3 hydrogen atoms, and that separates it from Adderall. People view meth as a much more dangerous drug than Adderall, but actually both of them can be prescribed to people suffering from things like ADHD. So I questioned whether Andrea really had meth pills on her at the time she was arrested. I'm a fact finder, that's how my brain works. I thought, these cops, being sick of seeing overdoses on campus and wanting to eliminate the problem, could see them listing Adderall pills as meth pills because of exactly what many people were thinking. It looks worse for Andrea. It would make sure that she was charged to the highest extent and would hopefully, in their mind, stop selling drugs on their campus, contributing to the negative effects the drugs bring. Or maybe in the same vein, they could have listed meth on this list even if Andrea wasn't carrying Adderall at all, because she did have MDMA on her, a street name for ecstasy or Molly. No one argued about that, and that is a very common party drug. But you know what else MDMA stands for? It starts with 4 letters, meth. MDMA is methyl 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine. It has methyl in it, just like methamphetamine. So I kind of think that the cops listed meth on that list of drugs not necessarily because Andrea was in possession of meth, but because technically she was in the form of MDMA. I could be wrong, I don't know. I have no other details. That is just my educated guess here. I saw Andrea liked music, she enjoyed partying and dancing, and she attended Coachella. The rest came in June during the summertime when school was out. Nevertheless, social media was going crazy again. It had now shifted from condolences to people having no sympathy for a drug dealer. I wondered, had these people ever loved someone who had been involved in anything illegal? It doesn't automatically make you a demon, not at all. I'm sure most of us either know someone who's partaken in some type of substance. I mean, alcohol is still a drug too. So I challenge you and the people who are judging so harshly and do judge so harshly to at least try to be sensitive. No one's perfect. All of us make mistakes, and hopefully we learn from them. In Andrea's case, the drug angle wasn't even an angle to investigators at all. They weren't even looking into it. There was nothing connecting this crime to anything related to drugs. They saw Andrea as someone at a low level, just selling the usual party drugs to college kids attending Coachella. They didn't even investigate it any further. Instead, they were doubling down on locating Alberto Medina. He was more dangerous than anything else right now, if he was indeed the murderer. On Saturday, September 26th, they finally tracked him down. They've got helicopters in the sky, and they're basically outside the residence, telling him to come out with his hands up. It was a scene, that's for sure. He's arrested and taken to the Fresno County Sheriff's Office in regard to the stolen speakers and into an interrogation or interview room, however you want to label it. You can see him here. He's sitting with 2 detectives. He's the one on the right with a closely shaved head, black tank top, and a tattoo visible on his right arm. They want to know where he was on the weekend of September 18th. He tells them he went to UCLA and stayed with his friend Eric Marquez. He's one of Alberto's friends from high school. They went to the Chris Brown concert, and once they were done there, they went to a party. They partied pretty much the entire weekend, just woke up, drank, hung out, walked around the UCLA campus and the surrounding community, looking for parties, and just chilled. Then he went home on Monday, and that's it. The detectives are like, "That's it?" He's like, "Yeah, that's it." One of the detectives asks him if he or Eric just happened to grab some speakers from someone while they were hanging out, drinking, just chilling. Alberto responded by saying, I know of no. So one of the detectives goes on to say that these speakers were down in LA, but somehow they got to Alberto's house. That's when he says, okay, here's the deal. Eric actually drove back with me to Fresno. He brought the speakers. While they're pressing him, they said, well, wait a minute. Your roommate Joseph said that he saw you drive up and place things in the garage. That's when things change again. Now Alberto apologizes. He says, I'm sorry, I took them. He says, I am guilty of that. He tells the detectives that there was a party one night and that some engineering students were, in his words, being dicks. So he decided to take the speakers, take a laptop, a bottle of alcohol. But he was really drunk. He says it so casually, he's just like, I was drunk, I took a few things. He put it so lightly, like it wasn't even a big deal. Well, all of this seems to add up to what the residents of that Red Roebling Avenue apartment said they were missing. So the investigators continue listening while Alberto tells them that they left that spot around 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And yes, parties do go on that long. Then he said they went back to Eric's, but that some guy by a dumpster pulled a gun on them and demanded that Alberto give him whatever he had. He had those speakers, but he didn't want to give him the speakers. So he told detectives that this guy ends up trying to shoot him, but they ran and he missed. They asked this guy what he looked like and what he was wearing, and Alberto says, I think he was wearing jeans and a tank top. Well, the detectives don't know what to think. They know hundreds of people come to that area to party. Just because Alberto was there and stole some things didn't mean that he was also the person who went into Andrea's apartment and killed her. They also know that what Alberto described as what the man with the gun was wearing matches the description of the man Sarah saw running from Andrea's room. He also had a tank top and jeans on, but this is California. That's pretty much the frat boy uniform of the summer. However, what they do know for sure is that Alberto is placing himself right across the street around the same time that Sarah said she saw someone outside their apartment complex, and not too long before the murder. Finally, they begin to question him about whether he was with any girls that night or any night while he was visiting. Alberto says, yeah. He was quick to say, well, yeah, of course, and he gives them two names, Zay Naoa, a UCLA student, and her roommate Gabby. He said he just met the girls that weekend and that they were Eric's friends. They hung out all weekend and partied together. While the detectives were continuing to press him, they're asking, are you sure that those were the only girls you were with? That there were no other girls that you remember hanging out with? After pressing him for a while and telling him, come on, you have a conscience. Tell us what happened. Alberto was like, okay, fine. Wow. They feel like they're really gonna get the truth. They finally broke him. He really came off like he really didn't want to tell them this. So he starts over. He said that he and Eric were at that party and it was him that decided to steal the speakers. But he says, well, this a-hole, referring to his friend Eric, goes across the street with a girl he met at the party. Detectives stop him there. They're like, what did the girl look like? Alberto thinks for a second. He says, well, she was a white girl, she was skinny, she had blonde hair. And they said, well, do you know her name? He's thinking for a second and then he says, I want to call her Andy. And he kind of posed it like a question, like he wasn't 100% sure. Wow, detectives must know they're onto something because he literally said the name of their victim. So they asked him if he remembers what she was wearing. Alberto responded by saying, a little shirt, high-top socks, a little bra, and some underwear. That's about it. So she wasn't wearing pants or a skirt? That's when they tell him that something actually happened to that girl, and it's important that he's honest from here on out. In that moment, he has this physical reaction. He just puts his hand on his head and says the F word. He says, and then he just blurts out, it's Eric. It's Eric. They were shocked because now they have yet another name, another person that's being implicated, Eric Marquez. Alberto explains that his friend Eric went over there, and in his words, he tried to have sex, or he's having sex, or whatever he's doing, and he comes back running to me and he's like, I just fed up, we gotta go bro, we gotta leave. I just hit the out of this girl. Alberto was saying that while he's busy across the street taking speakers and a laptop, his friend Eric, his good friend, was over there having sex with a girl that he thinks is named Andy. Then after Alberto had put the speakers in his car, he saw Eric come running out of those apartments across the street. He tells them that he had plastic bags around his hands. He says that's how he knew that Eric did something that wasn't right. Then he said that Eric took the plastic bags off, threw them in a dumpster, and then they left. Now they ask him what Eric was wearing, and Alberto says, jeans and a tank top. So here, Alberto is exposing his friend from high school just like that. But we're talking about murder. They haven't told him that yet, but eventually they make it clear that Andrea wasn't just beaten or hit. She was dead. Well, that's when Alberto was like, I know it was Eric. He said later, he found out 100% that Eric was the one who committed this murder because he confronted him about it. He texted him after he found out that a girl had been killed, and his friend admitted that he killed the blonde girl from the other night. That's also when Eric told Alberto that he had sex with that girl. This is a lot. It's exactly what the detectives had been waiting for. Everything is coming together. So they continue. They ask Alberto if he's ever seen a red blanket, and he says yes. Eric did have a red blanket. It was around his neck when he got in the car, but then at some point, Eric took it off. Then he had Alberto carry it, or he put it around Alberto's neck, or he put it in Alberto's car. When they were getting out of the car at Eric's apartment, he was cold. So Alberto grabbed it and wrapped it around his own neck. Well, they've got it all now. They've got the red blanket, the tank top, the jeans, and a confession by Alberto's best friend from high school that not only did he have sex with Andy that night, but he's responsible for her murder. At this point, it's been 5 days since Andrea was found dead. Alberto has now agreed to drive to Los Angeles with the detectives and show them where Eric lives, where he was staying that weekend, and where they can find his friend. Alberto directs them to this building, 11015 Strathmore Drive in Westwood, right near the UCLA campus. This building is only a 5-minute walk to Andrea's apartment where the speakers were stolen. They run a background check on Eric. He's also 22 years old, and he's a 5th-year pre-med student at UCLA. He doesn't have a criminal background either. Later that same day, they confront Eric Marquez at his apartment. They ask him if he has any information about what happened to Andrea Del Vesco, and they ask him what he did that weekend with his friend Alberto, specifically the night of September 20th into the early morning hours of the 21st. Eric says that he and Alberto were partying. They were out there all night on Roebling Avenue, and they came back to his apartment and fell asleep around 3 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock. He doesn't know what happened, but he knows that they were not involved with the murder, and that they weren't even out there at the time of the murder. They were asleep. That's all he knows. And he was very heavily intoxicated that night. They had basically been drinking all day and all night, and he has no idea about any of those details or who they were with or what they did. So now the detectives have 2 different stories, and Eric is not forthcoming. It seems like Eric is covering something up by saying he just doesn't remember anything, and they've got to get to the bottom of it. Either one of these men could be lying, but now detectives know there's one thing that doesn't lie: surveillance video. So they gain access to security camera footage from Eric's apartment building, and sure enough, they find Eric and Alberto on the video. They're at the elevators to Eric's building. This is around 2:40 in the morning. Eric is on the left, holding a drink in his hand, wearing dark jeans and a t-shirt. Alberto is the one on the right. He's kind of off frame here. He's wearing a dark-colored baseball cap, a tank top, and jeans. So already we have inconsistent information. Alberto was the one wearing a tank top, jeans, and a ball cap, the same outfit Sarah described the stranger wearing when she was unlocking her door at 5:35 a.m. She said the same person jumped over Andrea's balcony. Detectives are trying to get a timeline of where Eric and Alberto were at certain times. Sure enough, once again, they're spotted around 4:34 a.m. going back downstairs. Again, this time it looks like they're doing shots or jello shots or something. You can see clearly that Alberto's arm has a tattoo on it. He matches the description of the person Sarah saw. But many people wear this type of outfit, so they want to keep playing the video for more evidence. You can see Eric is still wearing a t-shirt and jeans. Now this shot right here, you can really see Alberto's tank top, and it's a Nike tank top. Although we can't see the color because this video is in black and white, we know that the suspect was described as wearing a black and white Nike tank top. The time is also important. Remember, Eric said that they were both asleep in his apartment from 3 to 8 a.m. No, they weren't. They were going downstairs to drink. This is very valuable information, but detectives want more, so they keep playing the video. Finally, the camera footage shows Alberto coming off the elevators to go back into Eric's apartment at 7:11 a.m. And get this, Alberto was seen here wearing a blanket. We can't see the color, but I'm going to tell you that it's a red Snuggie blanket, Andrea's Snuggie, that she was wearing when she fell asleep on her living room couch at 3 a.m. It is now on Alberto's shoulders, just like Sarah said the suspect had it on, draped over like a shawl or a cape. Sarah made that 911 call about the suspect running to the street as she chased after him, following that fire at 7:01 in the morning. They had enough time to make the 2-minute drive back, park, walk up to Eric's place, and the footage showed a red car matching the description of the getaway car parked in the parking garage at 7:03 a.m., with 2 people getting out of the car. Eric is not seen wearing the blanket, but remember, Alberto insisted that Eric was the one wearing jeans and a tank top. Bro, why are you going to tell detectives that your friend was wearing the outfit that you were actually wearing if you weren't the one that committed the crime? He also said that some random guy with a gun was wearing a tank top and jeans. To detectives, they believe they've got their man, Albert Medina. But wait, they want to keep going. They want to see when Alberto actually leaves Eric's at 7:30 in the morning. Alberto was seen coming out of Eric's apartment with a trash bag, no shirt, basketball shorts, and he still has a black baseball cap on. I wonder what's in the trash bag. If I had to guess, it's probably Alberto's bloody clothing, right? Kind of weird place to put your clothes, because I'm sure he brought a bag to spend the weekend with his best friend. And that friend is again just 2 steps behind him, right by his side. He knows Alberto's carrying a trash bag that he got all washed up in his apartment and that he's changed clothes. So what else does he know? That's what the detectives want to find out. So they once again confront Eric, now with the footage. They play for him, they show him screenshots, and they show him the pictures, the ones of him, and one more time they said what happened. Again, he maintained his original story that he didn't know. He was drinking heavily, and it's all a blur. He says he doesn't remember anything, not even getting on the elevators, nothing. Well, they know that can't be 100% true, because someone was driving that red vehicle. It was either Eric waiting in the driver's seat outside for Alberto to get back, or waiting in the passenger seat for his buddy to return. From what they heard, Alberto say that his friend said, remember he said he came running back to the car saying, I effed up, we gotta go? Most likely that's what Alberto said to Eric as Eric drove the getaway car. But they can't prove that Eric knew what Alberto did when he was inside Andrea's apartment. It seems as though both of them had the intent to burglarize the apartment where the student had their laptop and their speaker stolen. And since that was the theme of the night, drinking and stealing, detectives surmise that Eric probably assumed Alberto was just hitting up another house to steal things. This is all very circumstantial. They need more evidence. But they have enough probable cause to get a search warrant for both residences, Eric's and Alberto's. They also arrest both of them, and they're holding them until further investigation can be completed. That day when booking, they book both men in jail, and they have pictures of their bodies taken. It turns out Eric has no scratches on him, none on his face, on his hands, and nothing. He's clean. But it was a different story when they examined Alberto. He has several small nicks and scratches on his face that I'm showing you right here, as well as on his arms. As a matter of fact, there are a number of small cuts on his left hand, as you can see here, as well as a mark on the top of his head. It looks like he was in some kind of fight. It's all more evidence that Alberto was the one who killed Andrea. But when questioned about it, he said he got into a fight with someone. He doesn't remember it. He was drunk. On Sunday, September 27th, detectives are conducting a search of Eric's apartment. Kristen Rocco, an LAPD criminalist, found suspected blood in a number of locations, and they were collected for analysis. Now for Alberto's Fresno home that he shared with his roommates. Remember Joseph and Joseph? First, they locate the red Nissan Sentra, and they have it towed to the crime lab for testing. It's got the 3 letters for Lambda Chi Alpha, and it belongs to Alberto. When they contact the Fresno chapter of the fraternity, they're told that Alberto Medina had been suspended for violating the standards of conduct. When they search Alberto's room, they find a black trash bag in his closet. Remember, he was carrying that trash bag at Eric's. You'd think he would have thrown it away, but thankfully he didn't. When they pick it up, they see a bloody knife underneath it. When they open up that trash bag, the first thing they find is a big red Snuggie blanket, a black and white Nike tank top that has what looks like blood stains on it, and a pair of women's underwear. There was also a gray towel inside, black shorts, 2 pairs of men's underwear, a belt, 1 sock, and a cell phone. There was also a smaller white trash bag found in the closet, and it also had suspected blood on it. All of these items were sent to the crime lab to be tested for DNA, and it is not looking good for Alberto Medina. I would just talk about how dumb criminals really are. What is it? Is it adrenaline? Why not just throw the evidence away? Why keep it? Is it a memento? It's just mind-boggling, but I'm so glad they make mistakes like this. But the biggest mistake was taking someone's life to begin with. At this point, the other Joseph that lived with Alberto came forward, Joseph Garcia. He told investigators that when Alberto returned from Los Angeles, one of the first things he said was how crazy it was that a girl had been murdered right near where he was staying, over near UCLA. When Joseph asked him what happened, Alberto said that it looked like someone broke into her apartment and that the guy took advantage of her, forced her into intercourse. He used the RW, and then they burned the body to get rid of the evidence. Alberto was actually glorifying the burning of the body, and he said that he was positive that the perpetrator would get away with it. He also acted like it was really smart that the guy burned the place, not smart that he told his friend about it. The very next day, Monday, September 28th, Alberto's red Nissan was being examined. They found suspected blood smeared on the exterior door handle of the driver's door, suspected blood on the inside plastic inner handle, and the steering wheel. Another black sock was found that matched the one in the trash can. It also had suspected blood on it and was recovered from the trunk of the car as well. This was more than enough evidence to charge these men for the crime. Both were arrested on September 28th and held without bond for Andrea Del Vesco's murder. Prosecutors charged both men with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of burglary. Alberto was also charged with arson, and he was facing the death penalty. A hearing was set for the very next day. Of course, both Alberto and Eric pleaded not guilty to the charges at the hearing. About 20 of Eric's friends and family members showed up to support him, as well as Alberto's family, including his father, Jose. His father told reporters that his son told him he didn't do it. Eric's mother, who did not speak English but had her younger son translate for her, said that Eric came home to visit them on Saturday. That was also the day he was initially questioned by police. They went to see a movie, and Eric acted happy, like nothing was wrong at all. She also let the media know that her son was a hard-working student who wanted to become a doctor. She said he's a perfect son, a perfect person, a perfect boy. She went on to tell reporters that she didn't believe her son was guilty and that he never mentioned anything about a girl or a fire. His younger brother said that his mom can't comprehend or understand why he was picked. He's a good kid, he said. Picked? I don't think he was picked. I know it's hard for parents in these situations. They want to be supportive. I understand that. But it was almost implied that the police were pegging this crime on Eric, that he didn't willingly participate as Alberto's friend. But this was before the trial, so they are still innocent until proven guilty. By the next day, articles were up, including one saying that 2 men were being held in the death of a UCLA student. They were also asking the public for information in regard to the night of the 20th into the 21st. Someone came forward. His name is Julio. He was a cook at UCLA, and at around 5:30 in the morning on the 21st of September, after the parties on the street were wrapping up, Julio was out there collecting recyclable cans. He was on Roebling Avenue and saw a man get out of the driver's seat of a small red car that was parked across the street from Andrea's apartment building. The man had a large tattoo on his right arm and was acting belligerent. He came up and got in Julio's face and said, "Man, you know how to fight?" Something to that effect. Julio was just standing there like, "What are you talking about? Leave me alone." Julio went on to explain that there was another man seated in the front passenger seat of the red car, and both of them looked drunk. They were just laughing and carrying on together. Then the guy who got out of the car, the one who was asking him if he knew how to fight, explained to Julio that he needed help getting into an apartment where a girl lived in case there was a guy inside there. Julio noted that this guy seemed drugged. He was just heavily intoxicated, and Julio just said no. Then this man walked up toward Andrea's apartment building and went up the front stairs. That's when Julio left to go to work. It was only 5 minutes later when Sarah came home and saw a man in a black baseball cap, a tank top, and jeans at the bottom of the stairwell. This was it. Now everyone had to wait for the trial. Meanwhile, the evidence was being tested, and I want to tell you the results, but I also want to mention some things that were uncovered between the arrests and the trial. First, the evidence. You could have probably guessed. The DNA profile from the bloodstains that were on the knife and the white trash bag from inside the closet both matched Andrea's DNA profile. The major DNA profile from a bloodstain on the collar of the tank top also matched Andrea. There was a partial DNA profile from the sample taken from the woman's underwear that was consistent with Andrea's DNA as well. Plus, the blood on that sock found in the trunk matched Andrea's DNA, and the blood on the car door handle was a partial match. The blood at Eric's was a match to Andrea's. Andrea's family was overwhelmed with grief, but they were glad that Alberto and Eric had been arrested. However, not too long afterward, Arthur and Leslie were made aware that Sarah made those 911 calls, 2 of them, and the fact that 4 police officers were on scene after the screams were heard coming from their daughter's apartment. This changed everything. They started to wonder if their daughter would still be alive if these officers had actually investigated. They didn't even knock on the doors. When Andrea's dad tried to ask the LAPD about the details of that initial call and the response, he said his questions were very poorly received. He said he was rebuffed vigorously, and Leslie added that they made him feel uncomfortable for even asking these questions. But they were shocked by the fact that 4 officers were right there when their daughter was most likely being killed, and they didn't even knock on the door to make sure that nothing was going on. The call was made at 6:18, and the police were there in minutes at 6:23. Leslie will never know if her daughter was still alive when they got there, and that something could have been done to stop her killer. But that's a lot to think about. Even if she was already deceased, Leslie made another good point. If they had gotten there before the fire was started, at the very least, an additional violation wouldn't have been carried out on her body. They would have been able to see her the way she would have looked before she was completely burned. She went on to say she could have held her daughter one last time had those officers prevented the killer from burning the building. If they could have intervened faster, if they had not just left, because they were only there for 6 minutes, and by 7 a.m., the place was on fire. Both Leslie and Arthur were grateful for all the hard work that the LAPD had done to capture the people they believed did this, but they truly felt like a mistake was made here, and they were hoping that an investigation would be carried out. An obituary went out in the Austin American-Statesman newspaper on October 11th, with all the wonderful things that Andrea's family wanted her to be remembered for, as well as information about her celebration of life that was scheduled for October 17th at her alma mater, St. Andrew's Episcopal. Leslie said that Andrea was a beautiful soul she was one of the most loving, giving people that she knew. She always put the needs of others before hers. She also said she kept getting letters and notes from people from UCLA, and she said some we knew and some we never knew, about how she touched their lives. Leslie said that they knew how wonderful Andrea was and how lucky they were to have her. But to have all of these people telling them how she impacted their lives in such a positive and loving way really helped them when they were grieving. They were also so thankful that they had 21 years with her, and they just wanted everyone to remember her with love. They hoped that she was at peace and that they would love her forever. Her little sister, Alexis, was quoted saying, "I would like to steal all of her clothes because I just wanted to be her. I feel so lucky to have known her and that she was my sister. That's so cool to me." Her father was still having a hard time speaking about what happened to Andrea, and as the weeks turned into months, they were still waiting. The trial, like many others, just kept getting pushed by the defense so they could examine new evidence. Evidence like phone records, for example, especially Eric's attorneys. One thing I did realize was that a witness placed Alberto in the driver's seat of that getaway car, and that Andrea's blood was found on the driver's side handle of the car as well. So that meant Eric was probably not the getaway driver, but he was waiting outside, and that could make things more complicated for prosecutors. And it did. They wanted to make sure that they were charging him correctly for his participation in the crimes, both the burglary of the UCLA students across the street and his part in Andrea's murder, if he had any part in it at all. That was being reevaluated, and by the fall of 2016, a judge recommended that Eric be tried for aiding and abetting the murder, and Alberto be tried for murder committed during a felony robbery and arson. Prosecutors also charged both men with burglary and Alberto with arson, plus a new charge of cruelty to animals because poor Shea Panda suffered and died as a result of that fire. The death penalty was still on the table in regard to Alberto. By October 2017, Eric's attorneys were looking into a plea deal for their client. They wanted, at the very least, for these two defendants to be tried separately. The prosecutor said that he would consider negotiating a plea for Eric, but it was not on the table for Alberto. Eventually, a deal was made and the two trials were separated. Right after this, around December 2017, Eric actually went ahead and pled guilty to aiding and abetting the burglary to Andrea's, which was first-degree residential burglary and accessory after the fact, so that he would avoid trial altogether. He was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison. The prosecutor said that after reviewing the evidence, they believed that this was the appropriate charge to put forth for Eric's part of the crime. Also, an internal investigation was launched into the police officers who responded to that 911 call and left Andrea's without knocking. Andrea's dad was still having a hard time coming to terms with everything that happened. He said, "Countless times I've asked myself what I could have done to prevent this horrific tragedy, and I only hope that the LAPD asked themselves that same question as well." The LAPD spokesperson, Josh Rubenstein, responded to the allegations of misconduct by saying that the LAPD took swift action to hold department personnel accountable for mistakes made in the initial stages of the investigation. He couldn't say too much, but he did say that some of the officers were no longer employed by the LAPD, and he mentioned that the LAPD would work closely with the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office to ensure that those responsible for Andrea's murder are held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Well, it ended up that an internal investigation was done. 2 veteran officers, Sudduth, a 21-year-old veteran, and Williams, who worked there for 7 years, were both found guilty at separate boards of rights hearings. Both of the boards recommended termination. The fact that they were fired never even made headlines, and neither officer chose to speak to the media. However, their attorney, Robert Rico, did, and he said the outcome of the case was undeniably tragic, but the officers were not to blame. One reason that he wanted to point out was that even though Sarah thought the screams were coming from the unit below her, she also mentioned an echo effect in the complex's courtyard that made pinpointing the source of the sound difficult. That was a quote. He also referred to the information that Sarah provided as being vague. This attorney used to be a police officer, so in his expert opinion, with the facts that were known to him, the officers executed proper due diligence in conducting the exterior search, and doing so yielded no evidence of a crime. In the officer's mind, there was no suspect, there was no victim. He said that the officers spoke amongst themselves and discussed knocking on the complex doors, but the most senior officer, STH, made the command decision not to, because there just wasn't enough information to start waking up residents that early in the morning. Wow, would it have been that inconvenient? I bet if you asked those residents now, they would much rather have been woken up than have their friend murdered. Attorney Rico went on to say that the officer's failure to knock on the door had no bearing on Andrea's chance of survival. She was dead before the officers got there. Really? Because you were there when she took her last breath, right? That just angered me. Lastly, Rico said that Officer STH and Williams received overly harsh punishments, not because of what they failed to do, but because of the subsequent tragedy they could not have anticipated. He said, "We don't fire people for not knocking on doors." So, the two rookie officers were not fired. Leslie and Arthur's response to all of this was that they were grateful for the aspects of the LAPD's work, but Leslie said that they know they made a mistake and no one from the police department ever apologized for that. Would that have been so hard either, just to say sorry? But I guess it implies guilt. The trial for Alberto Medina began on May 15, 2018, nearly 3 years after Andrea's murder. Her entire family was there. Prosecutor Avila told the court that Alberto was standing trial for 5 separate charges: 1 count of murder, 1 count of arson, 2 counts of burglary, and 1 count of cruelty to animals. In his opening statement, he told the jurors that Andrea's life was taken away from her by Alberto, and that he stabbed her multiple times to silence her so she couldn't call out for help, and that Shea Panda was also silenced and was found by firefighters at the foot of her bed. On the first day of trial, the jury heard from Sarah Muir, the student who made those 911 calls and was an eyewitness. They played those calls for the jury. They also heard from Connor Kirk, who was also a student at the time, and he too saw Alberto's red car with that fraternity sticker fleeing from the scene when the fire was coming out of Andrea's apartment. Mahir, the owner of the Sonos speakers, told the jury about realizing that they were gone, and now he and his roommates had their window in their apartment open because it wouldn't close properly. This could have been how Alberto got inside. His laptop was also retrieved from a shelf in Alberto's closet, and he was able to identify it at trial because of the stickers he knew he put on it. Several other witnesses were called, including the first responders, firefighters, the medical director of VCA West Los Angeles Animal Hospital, in regard to little Shea Panda, and Leslie Del Vesco, Andrea's mom. On the second day, they heard from Alberto's roommates, including Joseph Garcia, who told the jury how Alberto told him about the girl that had been murdered and said, "No one would be able to catch the murderer because the individual torched the apartment and left her body unrecognizable." He said that Alberto also told him, "They're probably not even going to be able to ID the body because it was burned so badly." They also heard from Julio Sentian, who was being harassed by Alberto, remember, outside of Andrea's apartment. He was putting his hands in fists and asking him in Spanish if he knew how to fight, because he might need some help getting inside this girl's apartment in case there was a guy inside. He gestured to Andrea's place when he said this. Julio said he left because he was scared of Alberto, and he saw him walk towards Andrea's apartment and sit on those stairs out front. That day of the trial closed out by hearing from Officer Monteague, one of the rookie cops, and he talked about flashing his flashlight into those apartments and not seeing anyone inside or any signs of forced entry. He was also the officer that came back after they were called out to the fire, and he's the one that told Sarah that they had not knocked on the doors. Abigail Stout was one of Andrea's roommates, and she testified that the knife found in Alberto's closet matched a knife set in their apartment. The crime scene technicians testified that the blood matched Andrea's DNA. Alberto declined to testify on his own behalf, which is probably a good idea, and the prosecution rested its case. Then the defense called their only witness, Remember when Alberto said that he was with two women that weekend, a girl named Zan and her roommate Gabby? Well, the defense called Marine Corps Second Lieutenant Zay Aoa, a former UCLA Navy ROC cadet and active service member. She was their only defense witness. She said she spent the weekend with Gabby, Alberto, and Eric. She met Alberto through Eric at a friend's birthday party on Friday night. She said that she and her roommate met him again on Sunday to drink in Eric's apartment on Strathmore Drive. She said that they purchased some tequila and cranberry juice at Ralph's earlier that evening, and they spent about 2 hours playing drinking games and that they were pretty drunk, and Alberto was plastered. Then the four of them left the apartment after Eric broke a bong and ran outside. The guys left them to clean up the broken glass, and I found out that this was a screen grab right here from the security footage of Eric and Alberto near the elevators around this time. Then the four of them left for a place called Tommy's Taco on Gailey Avenue, which is right here, a 7-minute walk. But then Alberto called one of Zane's friends a racial slur, so they left. They called an Uber, and all four of them got inside. Zane said that she made it clear to the Uber driver that she wanted the driver to drop off Alberto and Eric first, and then take her and Gabby back home. At this point, she said that Alberto was really drunk and yelling that he wanted to go to her apartment. It was 1:53 a.m. when the Uber driver dropped Eric and Alberto off at Eric's, and then the two girls continued to their apartment. Uber receipts were shown to the jury confirming the times and the destinations. When cross-examined, Zane said that she thought Alberto had little consideration for others. She said he was just one of those loud guys. People like that feel like they can do whatever. The fact that right before Andrea was killed, this man was yelling that he wanted to go to Zane's apartment with her is very telling to me. Pent-up sexual aggression mixed with heavy intoxication and possibly drugs. The defense rested. Now something interesting came out during the trial. The prosecution had a theory of how the events took place, that when Julio saw Alberto get out of the car, Eric was in the passenger seat. This was around 5:35 when Sarah saw Alberto on those steps. We can't be sure what transpired after Sarah saw him run away, but somehow he got inside of that apartment. The girls said it was common for them to keep their doors unlocked. Plus, Andrea's French doors were broken and didn't close fully. But there's more. Jessica testified that she and Andrea would go on walks with Shay around the neighborhood. After Alberto was identified, she saw a picture of him and recognized him as someone they encountered that weekend. One of the times that they were walking the dog on Roebling Avenue, possibly that Sunday, she remembers that Andrea had a quick exchange with him, saying that she lived in the Pi Beta Phi sorority apartments. Later they were all up on their front balcony having a party, and he saw those girls. The prosecution believes that between 5:35 and the screams that Sarah heard around 6:15, Alberto had somehow made his way inside. They know that Andrea was initially sleeping on the couch in the living room, but was found in her bedroom behind a closed door. She never closed her door at night. Remember, Samantha left around 5:50 in the morning and saw her roommate Andrea sleeping on that couch. But by 6:30, she was in her room behind a closed door. The fact that Alberto had asked Julio if he could fight definitely points to the fact that he took that knife that Andrea's roommates recognized and visually matched to a knife block in Andrea's kitchen. Most likely, as soon as he came inside. He could have taken it to protect himself in case a guy was in the apartment, like he told Julio, or because he knew all along what he was going to do. Either way, the intention to arm himself was there. He most likely wielded that knife to get Andrea to go to her room. Whether he came through the front doors or the French doors doesn't really make a difference, but we know that the killer exited through the French doors later. It's believed that Alberto forced Andrea to have sex with him while threatening her with a knife. At some point, she began to scream. Whether this was before, during, or after the forced sexual contact, we don't know for sure. But Shay also began barking, and this was heard by Sarah at 6:15, just 45 minutes after Alberto had been seen lurking around the apartments. The murder was most likely taking place. Andrea was being stabbed, and we know 2 of those wounds would have been instantly fatal. The cops got there at 6:23 and used flashlights to look inside the rooms. They didn't see anyone on Andrea's bed, but the blood on the floor tells the story. She was most likely on the floor with Alberto when the police were outside. She was bleeding out. Who knows if little Shay was being silenced by being held or hurt. At that point, no barks were heard, or maybe since she usually doesn't bark, once Andrea stopped fighting and was dying on the floor, little Shay stopped fighting too. No one except the killer knows what happened in the time frame between the 911 calls, but the prosecutor believed that Alberto was inside whether he knew cops were there or not. He went undetected, and then he placed Andrea on her bed, took a trash can, started a fire with what was inside, and dumped it on top of Andrea to cover up the evidence that she had been stabbed. Remember Alberto's description of what Andrea was wearing when he allegedly saw her at a party before his friend took her to her apartment? A little shirt, high-top socks, a little bra, and some underwear, right? Because she was asleep on the couch with her snuggie covering her. She was found without her underwear, which were later found at Alberto's house. It's clear to me what happened. By May 24th, both sides had rested. Thursday, May 24th, the jury rendered a guilty verdict in the Los Angeles County Superior Court. Judge convicted Medina of first-degree murder. He was also convicted of arson, cruelty to animals, and 2 counts of burglary. But now they have to wait for a sentencing hearing to find out his ultimate fate. The hearing was scheduled for September 21st, 2018, 3 years to the day that Andrea was found murdered. That was a very significant date to her friends and family, who all came to share how much Andrea meant to them in their victim impact statements. About a dozen people spoke. Andrea was described as magic and having the ability to empathize and connect with others. Her friend Heather, while crying, said, "Today is my chance to fight back to my kooky friend Andy. Thank you for wearing color as you dance in this world." Many of her friends talked about the trauma they went through. Lizzie said, "I woke up early to the sound of helicopters. In that moment, the world I knew melted away. What if I was next?" She said that till this day, she wakes up fearing for her life. Many spoke about how they had to hide from reporters that were trying to get statements from them nonstop, and it just kept bringing the pain of their friend's death up again. Another friend of Andrea's, Nicole, said that Andrea's murder brought new fears to her life, like the fear of strange men and a discomfort in the world that we live in. Some of her friends admitted they regretted not taking the police inspection of the property more seriously. They heard them and saw them with their flashlights, but they shrugged it off, and now they wish they hadn't. John Mannheimer, who had been friends with Andrea since freshman year, recalled a day when he came to help her assemble a bed frame. Instead of helping her as he promised, he said he laid on the floor of her apartment just ranting about what an awful day he had. He said, "She didn't even complain that I wasn't helping. She just listened to me. Whenever I had a bad day, she could make it all go away. It was like we were in our own bubble where nothing bad could happen." He said that Andy could see uniqueness in every single person. She was the sweetest person, even to complete strangers. He ended with, "I just miss her. She'll always have a special place in my heart." But out of all of the victim impact statements, it was probably Andrea's mother, Leslie, that stood out most. She mentioned the date, September 21st. It's a constant reminder of the day that Alberto decided to make the choice to take her wonderful, amazing daughter's life. They used to talk for hours. She's gonna miss that. She went on to say that at the very least, could Alberto just tell them the truth about what happened and why he did it? She questioned his intention and his motivation, because she believes he went out looking for blood that night, not just to steal from someone. That was clear from the amount of stab wounds, 19. It was extreme. Leslie said that from the day she was born, she knew that Andrea was an angel on earth. Her father said that though her life was cut short, when she was here, she affected so many people in so many positive ways, and he's just starting to understand it. Throughout the trial, Alberto was emotionless. He never showed remorse. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He addressed Alberto saying, "You murdered a beautiful, innocent person. You have seriously wounded an entire community, and you must never walk free again. The judge also added a symbolic number of years. I think it was 12 extra years on Alberto's life sentence, because of how heinous the crime was. But Alberto's defense attorney asked the judge to remove them because she argued that the murder was out of character for Alberto, that he didn't have a criminal record, and he didn't go into Andrea's with a weapon, so it wasn't premeditated. I totally disagree with that, because premeditation can happen in the blink of an eye. He had plenty of time to decide not to kill Andrea. But his defense attorney went on to say that the murder was not sophisticated, it was the opposite of sophisticated, that he left a bunch of evidence behind, even saying that it wasn't a smart move on his part. And I have to agree with that. Nothing about this crime was smart. It was senseless. The judge, of course, refused the defense's request and kept the additional years on his sentence. Andrea's family was relieved that Alberto would remain behind bars where he belonged, but it doesn't bring Andrea back. Some of her friends said that in honor of Andrea, they wanted to get a fur coat and have it framed so they could display it in their apartment. Her sister Alexis went on to be a hairstylist, and she's super adorable. I'm sure Andrea would be so proud of her, especially her bright hair and her unique style. I want to end with a couple of things that Leslie said. One, she spoke up when the Idaho killings occurred, and she said that she believes on-campus housing is safer than students living off-campus in unsupervised apartments. But she understands it's not possible for schools to provide on-campus housing for every student. So instead, they should focus on teaching students how to be safer, and these institutions should spend more time informing students about the risks that exist and how to reduce them and defend themselves. But I think the most important thing that Andrea's mom said was that even though it's nice to leave your doors open for friends to drop by, don't. Because unfortunately, there are people in this world that don't have your best interest in their hearts. I'll end with Jessica's words about Andrea that she spoke at the vigil. She said, "You are not truly dead unless you are forgotten."